He sat at the altar of the most expensive wedding Seoul had seen in a decade, surrounded by 500 guests, 12 bodyguards, and enough floral arrangements to bury a small army, and he could not move an inch, not because his legs were paralyzed, because someone had locked his wheelchair. Someone in this room wanted him dead before the champagne was poured, and the shooter was already raising his weapon. The only person who noticed was a maid from Chicago who had no business being anywhere near a Korean crime lord, and even less business saving his life. This is the story of how she did it anyway. If this story pulls you in, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Now stay with me, because it only gets darker from here. The Han River ran silver beneath an overcast Seoul sky, and the Hanul Palace rose above it like something carved from ambition and money. All white marble columns, floor-to-ceiling glass, and the kind of architectural arrogance that announces power before a single word is spoken. 300 cherry blossom trees had been imported from Jeju specifically for this weekend. They lined the circular driveway in perfect rows, their petals drifting down onto the hoods of black Mercedes convoys and the shoulders of men in dark suits who wore earpieces and kept their hands folded in front of them at all times. It was the kind of wedding that cost more than most people would earn in 4 lifetimes. It was also the kind of wedding where the groom had not smiled once in the 6 hours since arriving. Kang Tae-jun sat in his custom-fitted electric wheelchair near the preparation suite on the 2nd floor, studying the security feed on the tablet in his lap. His suit was charcoal gray with a single white pocket square. His jaw was set. His eyes moved from camera to camera with the same unhurried precision he brought to every problem. Slowly, methodically, the way a man reads a battlefield rather than a room. He was 38 years old, and he looked exactly like what he was. Someone who had spent the last 15 years making decisions that other men were too afraid to make, and living with the weight of every single one. The car bombing had taken his legs. A Tuesday morning in January, his motorcade crossing Mapo Bridge, a device planted beneath the second vehicle. He remembered the sound more than anything, not the explosion itself but the silence directly after it, that underwater stillness before the pain arrived. 3 of his men died. He survived, which some people in certain circles considered the greater tragedy. His spinal cord was damaged at the lumbar level. Incomplete injury, the doctor said, which meant there was sensation but no reliable function, which meant he could feel everything and control nothing below his waist, which meant every morning he woke up was a negotiation between what his body had been and what it was now. He had spent 4 months in a private rehabilitation facility in Switzerland and had not complained once, not to the doctors, not to his staff, not to the lieutenant who flew over every 2 weeks to brief him on syndicate business. Complaining required a belief that the universe owed you something different. Tae-jun had stopped believing that a long time ago. What he had not stopped believing in was the Black Phoenix Syndicate, the organization his father had built from a network of dock workers and illegal card rooms in the 1980s, and that Tae-jun had transformed into something far more sophisticated and far more dangerous over the course of his tenure. Import logistics, private security contracts, real estate. And underneath all of it, like load-bearing walls behind expensive wallpaper, the darker operations that kept the whole structure profitable and the whole structure quiet. He knew every pressure point in Seoul's underworld. He knew which politicians needed to be managed, which prosecutors needed to be reminded of past favors, which rival organization leaders respected strength, and which ones were simply waiting for a moment of weakness. The wedding was a response to that last category. It had been his advisor's idea, initially, a strategic marriage to Yoon Se-rin, the only daughter of Yoon Byung-chul, a semi-retired financier with deep ties to the southern port networks, and enough legitimate business cover to make the alliance valuable on multiple fronts. Se-rin was 29, educated in Paris, fluent in 4 languages, and had been informed of the arrangement 6 months ago with the kind of calm acceptance that Tae-jun recognized as either genuine composure or deeply buried resentment. He had met her 4 times before today. Their conversations had been polite and efficient. He did not expect love from this marriage. He expected stability, optics, and a consolidated financial network. That was sufficient, or it had been, until 40 minutes ago. Park Do-hyun entered the preparation suite without knocking. He was Tae-jun's lieutenant, 35 years old, former military intelligence, built like a man who had been in several rooms where things went badly and had walked out of all of them. His face right now was the face he made when the news was bad, and he wasn't sure how bad yet. "She's gone," Do-hyun said. Taejun did not look up from the tablet. Define gone. Her suite is empty. Her passport is gone. Her personal accounts were accessed from an overseas server 40 minutes ago. Do-hyun paused. Min Seok's private plane left Gimpo at 6 this morning. The tablet lowered. Taejun looked at his lieutenant. "How much?" Taejun said. It wasn't a question exactly. It was the thing you say when you already know the answer is going to be worse than the question. Initial estimate somewhere between 200 and 250 million from the secondary accounts, the ones that weren't supposed to be accessible without your biometric authorization. And yet, the secondary accounts required a voice confirmation and a physical keycard. Taejun had the keycard, or he had believed he did. He looked down at the inner breast pocket of his jacket, where the card had been since 6 this morning when he dressed. He reached in. The pocket was empty. The card had been swapped sometime in the last 12 hours, probably last night at the pre-wedding dinner, when there had been enough movement and enough noise and enough people managing his chair and adjusting his jacket and making the 1,000 small physical interventions that came with being in a wheelchair in a formal setting. Each one a brief window where hands could have access to things they shouldn't. He had become, he realized, easy to rob, not because he was careless, because everyone treated him as though he needed to be managed, and managing required touching, and touching created opportunity. He thought about who had been closest to him last night. He thought about his cousin. Kang Min Seok was 32 years old, and had grown up understanding that everything around him, the compound in Seongbuk-dong, the staff, the cars, the deference, belonged to the family name, and that the family name ultimately meant Taejun. He had worked within the syndicate for 8 years in a mid-level operations role that kept him comfortable and kept him distant from real authority. He was charming in the way that men are charming when they want something. He told good stories at dinners. He remembered names. He had spent 8 years being underestimated, and Taejun, in this moment, sitting in this preparation suite with an empty breast pocket and a ghost of a fiancé, understood that he himself had been the primary architect of that underestimation. "Who knows?" Taejun said. "You, me, the 3 men I pulled the camera feeds with. No one else yet." "Keep it that way until after the ceremony." Do-hyun's expression shifted slightly. "You still intend to—" "There are 480 guests downstairs. Half of them are here because they want to measure whether I'm still worth fearing. If I cancel this ceremony without explanation, I answer that question for them." Taejun folded his hands in his lap. His voice had not changed pitch or tempo once since Do-hyun walked in. That was the thing about him, the thing that had always made the people who worked for him slightly uneasy even when they trusted him. He processed catastrophe the same way he processed weather reports. "We proceed. We manage the optics. We deal with the actual problem after." "And Saren?" "Saren is a problem I'll address when I have the precise coordinates of where she and my cousin are spending my money." He picked up the tablet again. "Find me those coordinates." Do-hyun nodded and left. Taejun sat for another moment, alone in the preparation suite, listening to the muffled sounds of an orchestra warming up 4 floors below. Then he wheeled himself toward the door, and his chair stopped moving. He pushed the joystick again. Nothing. He checked the battery indicator. Full charge. He tried the manual override toggle on the left armrest. The chair did not respond. He reached down and checked the drive wheels, and found it then, a small magnetic suppressor clamped to the underside of the left motor housing, disabling the electric drive. Simple, elegant, invisible, unless you were looking for it. Someone had done this while the chair was in this room, which meant someone with access to a preparation suite that had been under guard all morning. He sat in a locked chair in a room with the orchestra playing below, and for the first time since the bombing, he felt something close to genuine fear. Not of dying, specifically, but of dying like this. Stationary. Helpless. A visible target in a room full of people who would read his death as an invitation. He controlled his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and deliberate. He was not going to call for Do-hyun, not yet. He was going to think. He was still thinking when the door to the preparation suite opened and a woman in a catering uniform walked in carrying a tray of water glasses. Pinterets. She almost walked right back out. She'd been told the suite was empty. The guest management coordinator had sent the catering staff through the upper floor rooms at staggered intervals to refresh water stations and remove anything that needed clearing before the ceremony began. Room 214 was on Nia's list. She'd knocked twice, gotten no answer, and pushed the door open with her shoulder the way she always did when carrying a full tray, turning sideways to get through without spilling. The man in the wheelchair was looking at her with the particular expression of someone who has been caught in a private moment and is deciding how much of that to acknowledge. Nia Brooks froze in the doorway for approximately 2 seconds, which was long enough to register several things simultaneously. The man was the groom was alone, the groom's wheelchair was not moving despite the fact that his hand was on the control, and there was something clamped to the bottom of the left wheel that did not look like standard equipment. She had grown up in Englewood on the south side of Chicago, the second of 4 children, in a house where her mother worked double shifts and her father had been intermittently present and then permanently absent by the time Nia was 12. She had learned, young, that the people who survived difficult situations were almost never the people who panicked. They were the people who noticed. Her grandmother had called it reading the room. Her older brother, Marcus, who had navigated his teens in a neighborhood where reading the room was occasionally the difference between going home and not going home, had called it staying sharp. Nia had simply called it paying attention, and she had been doing it her entire life, and she was doing it now. The man in the wheelchair was Kang Tae-jun. She knew who he was. Everyone on the catering staff had been briefed, shown photographs, told to treat him with absolute deference, and under no circumstances to engage him in direct conversation unless spoken to first. She had also, over the course of the morning, overheard things that the catering staff was not supposed to overhear. She set the tray down on the table near the door and said, in the careful, neutral Korean she had been improving for 3 years, "The drive motor, there's something on it." Taejun said nothing for a moment. His expression did not change exactly, but something behind it shifted. "You noticed?" "Yes." "How long have you been in this building?" "Since 4 this morning, setup crew." And it was not a complete question, but she understood what it was asking. She had been here 9 hours, moving through rooms, refilling things, staying invisible the way service staff were trained to stay invisible, and she had been paying attention the entire time. "The man by the east pillar," she said. "He's been holding the same champagne glass for 2 hours without drinking from it. He has a scar that runs from his left ear to his jaw. He keeps looking at the area near the altar, not the entrance. When someone walks in, he doesn't look. He's not watching for guests. He's watching for a position." A beat of silence. "And before that," she said, "about an hour ago, near the service corridor behind the flower arrangement on the north wall. 2 men. One of them said the word confirm 3 times in 90 seconds. The other one smelled like battery acid and machine oil, not cooking smells, not cleaning smells." Taejun had gone very still. Not the stillness of someone caught off guard, the stillness of someone recalibrating. "You speak Korean well enough to follow that conversation." "Well enough," she said, "not perfectly, but the word confirm is the same in a lot of languages when people say it a certain way." He studied her. She stood at a neutral 5'6", dark-skinned, broad-shouldered, wearing the plain white catering jacket with a small logo on the breast pocket. She had natural hair pulled back tightly under the service cap. Her face was composed in a way that suggested she had significant practice appearing calm in situations where she wasn't. "What do you think they're planning?" he said. "I think someone locked your chair," she said, "and put a man with a gun near the altar. And I think when the ceremony starts and everyone is seated and looking at the front of the room, the math gets a lot simpler." Another silence, longer this time. "You could have said nothing," he said. "I know." "Why didn't you?" She thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because I watched you come in this morning," she said finally. "You got out of the car and the whole motorcade was moving around you, people adjusting, holding doors, making way. And you sat in the middle of all of it like you were the still point. Like you'd decided a long time ago that the situation was going to be whatever it was, and your job was just to deal with it." She paused. "I recognized that. It seemed like a waste to let someone shoot it." He looked at her for a long moment. The orchestra downstairs shifted into a slower piece. "Can you fix the wheel?" he said. "The suppressor has a magnetic clamp. If I have something ferromagnetic." She glanced around the room, moved to the table, picked up the small silver dish that held breath mints, bent it slightly, and pressed it against the underside of the clamp. There was a soft click. "Try it now." He pressed the joystick. The chair moved forward 6 inches and stopped where he intended. He looked at the wheel, then at her. "There's a service corridor," he said, "on the west side of the ballroom. Do you know it?" "I've used it 4 times this morning. If I enter the ballroom from the main entrance, I come in from the east. The man by the pillar has a clear angle. If you come in from the service corridor," she said, "you come in from behind the flower arrangement on the north wall, directly opposite the altar, and the pillar is on his left side. He'd have to turn completely to get a line. That gives me roughly 30 seconds of exposed movement to reach the altar position. Closer to 25 if the music is playing and everyone is standing and looking at the entrance." He nodded once, slowly. "I'll need someone pushing the chair," he said. "Not the electric. Too quiet. Too easy to stop remotely if there's a second device on the system. Manual, visible. It needs to look intentional, like a choice." She understood what he meant. A man in an electric wheelchair being pushed by a catering maid would look bizarre. But bizarre, in a room full of people programmed to treat everything around this man as choreographed and significant, might read as ceremony rather than desperation. People saw what they expected to see. They expected everything tonight to be staged. "Okay," she said, "you understand what happens if this goes wrong." "I've been thinking about that since I walked in," she said. "I'm still here." He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small card. Not the key card, she would learn later what that was, but a personal contact card, blank except for a number. He set it on the table next to the tray of water glasses. "After," he said. "If there is an after." She picked up the handles of the wheelchair. The guests were already seated when Nia pushed Kang Tae-jun through the service corridor and into the north entrance of the Hanul Palace ballroom. The orchestra was playing. 480 people were turned toward the east entrance, waiting for the groom to appear. The flower arrangement, an enormous construction of white peonies and orchids on a marble stand, partially concealed their entry point for the first 8 seconds. 8 seconds, Nia counted silently as she pushed, keeping her pace steady and her face neutral, the same face she used when carrying trays through crowds where people look through her rather than at her. This was the same skill applied to a different problem. Be unremarkable. Be furniture. Give them nothing to focus on. They cleared the flower arrangement. Several guests in the nearest rows noticed the movement and turned. Nia watched their expressions in her peripheral vision, confusion, then a rapid social recalibration as they registered that it was the groom being escorted, and that this must be how it was supposed to happen. The brain's desperate need to make sense of ceremony was the most reliable thing in the room right now. She was counting on it. She had covered roughly 40 feet of the 60-foot distance to the altar when she saw the man by the east pillar. He had registered the commotion, heads turning at the wrong entrance, and he turned to look. He was younger than she'd expected up close, clean-shaven except for the scar, which ran white and raised against darker skin along his jaw. His champagne glass was still in his left hand. His right hand was at his side, and she could see the shape of something beneath his jacket. He saw Tae-jun. He saw Tae-jun was not where he was supposed to be. For a fraction of a second, Nia and the scarred man made eye contact across the room. And she understood that fraction of a second was all she was going to get. She pushed harder. The chair jumped forward. Several guests startled. She heard murmuring, a woman gasping, and underneath all of it she heard the man by the pillar say something low and sharp into a comm device at his wrist. They hit the altar position at the same moment that the first shot was fired. The bullet struck the marble column 4 feet behind where they had been, and then the room exploded. Not literally, but the social contract of 500 carefully curated guests shattered in an instant as people understood simultaneously that a gun had been fired, and the understanding moved through the room like a wave, and the wave became screaming, and the screaming became chaos. Do-hyun appeared from the east side of the room with 2 men. He looked at Tae-jun at the altar, and then at Nia behind the chair, and his face passed through 3 distinct expressions in less than a second before settling into professional action. Service corridor, Taejun said. West, now. Who is now Do-hyun? They moved. Nia pushed. Do-hyun and his men formed a loose perimeter, moving fast but not running, because running was panic, and panic was contagious, and they needed the crowd's chaos to work for them rather than against them. Another shot hit somewhere above them. She heard it impact against glass, and then they were through the service door and into the gray concrete quiet of the corridor beyond. The door closed behind them. The sounds of the ballroom became muffled, then distant. Nia stopped pushing and bent forward, hands on her knees, and breathed. Her heart was doing something that felt structural, like a punch from the inside. She'd been shot at before. Once, when she was 16, caught at the edge of something she hadn't been part of on a night she'd taken a wrong street home. She had never forgotten how her body had responded. Not fear, exactly, not in the moment, but a complete biological alert that used every resource she had, and then asked for more. "You're hyperventilating," Taejun said. "I'm aware," she said. "Slow it down." "I know how to breathe." "Then do it." She straightened up, took a breath, held it, let it out, did it again. Do-hyun was on his phone, speaking in rapid Korean. His two men had taken up positions at either end of the corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "We need to move," Do-hyun said. "The catering entrance on sublevel 2. I have a vehicle." "How long?" 3 minutes. Taejun looked back at Nia. "You're coming." "I have a job," she said. It was an absurd thing to say, and she knew it the moment it left her mouth. "You shot a target with a professional gunman and the knowledge of exactly how he planned to move. You are not going back into that ballroom. You are coming with us until I understand exactly what you know and how you know it." She looked at him. He looked at her. The corridor hummed. "Okay," she said, for the second time that morning. The catering truck was refrigerated. It was the only vehicle in the sublevel that didn't require key authorization to start, because it was listed under the hospitality company's fleet rather than the palace's. Do-hyun had the driver's ID clipped to the sun visor, and he drove with the particular focused calm of someone who was managing a crisis list in his head in real time. Nia sat in the back with Taejun and one of the security men, on the floor between metal shelving units that smelled like raw fish and industrial refrigerant. The truck rocked as it climbed the ramp to street level. Nia kept her back against the shelving and her knees pulled up and tried to make a list of every decision she had made in the last 90 minutes that had led her to this particular position. The list was short, and each item felt entirely logical in the moment it occurred and collectively insane in retrospect. "Tell me your name," Taejun said. He was sitting upright in the chair, which had been secured to the floor anchors along the truck wall. He did not look like a man who had just been shot at. He looked like a man on his way to a meeting. "Nia Brooks. American. Chicago. How long in Seoul?" 2 years, 18 months with the hospitality company." "Who sent you today?" "To the palace." "The company. We had the contract for the event. I was on the morning setup crew." He processed that. "When did you notice the man with the scar?" "About 7 this morning. He was early. All the guests were early. The security sweep was thorough, but he came in with the second wave and positioned himself immediately. No social behavior, no conversation, no movement toward the refreshments or the seating arrangement board. He just placed himself." "And the men in the service corridor?" "Around 9. I was clearing the setup from the flower installation. They came through the north service door from outside and had a conversation in the corridor for about 4 minutes. They didn't notice me because I was inside the arrangement frame." "You were inside the flower arrangement." "The installation required internal anchoring. I was securing the frame from inside. It's not unusual." A pause. They talked about timing, about a signal. The word confirm was a response, like an answer to a question being asked through the earpiece. The battery acid smell was from whatever they'd used on your chair. The clamp device. Do-hyun, from the front. "You identified the suppressor from the smell." "My father worked in a battery shop until I was 8. The smell is specific." She hesitated. "I should tell you there was something else. Before the corridor, in the preparation wing on the second floor, 2 people, a man and a woman. I heard the name Min Seok." The temperature in the back of the truck seemed to drop. "What did you hear?" Taejun said. His voice had not changed. That was the thing. His voice never changed. but the quality of the silence around his words had shifted into something denser. They were talking fast, she said. My Korean isn't perfect, but I heard a number, the number 8, and then something I think meant bye tonight. And then the name Min Seok, and a word that I know means finished or done. And then the woman said something that I know means it's already gone. The truck hit a speed bump and rattled. The woman, Taejun said. Describe her. Naya described what she had seen through a gap in a partition wall. Height, hair, the coat she was wearing, a distinctive silver bracelet on the right wrist. Taejun was quiet for a very long time. That's Serin, Do-hyun said. Yes, Taejun said. Nia looked between them. The security man near her was staring at the floor. Your fiancé, she said. Former, Taejun said. Just that. One word, and then nothing more. Imyat. The safe house was inside an abandoned shipping facility on the edge of the Incheon waterfront. 3 floors of corrugated metal and poured concrete that smelled like salt water and machine grease and old wood. It had the particular quality of a place that had been empty long enough to become something else. Not abandoned, exactly, but waiting. 8 of Do-hyun's most trusted men were already there when the catering truck pulled into the ground floor bay. Nia sat on a metal folding chair near one of the industrial windows and looked out at the harbor. While Do-hyun briefed Taejun, and Taejun said very little, and the men moved around the space with the organized efficiency of people who had rehearsed for exactly this kind of contingency. She was thinking about her apartment in Mapogu. She was thinking about her shift tomorrow morning and whether she would have a job to return to. She was thinking about her mother in Chicago, who called every Sunday and to whom Nia reported the broad outlines of her life in Seoul, the good neighborhoods, the food, the people she worked with, and carefully omitted the rest. She was thinking that her mother was going to call this Sunday, and Nia was not sure what she was going to say. Do-hyun came to stand near her after a while. He wants to talk to you, he said. When you're ready. I've been ready, she said. Taejun was positioned near the eastern wall where someone had set up a workstation. Laptop, phones, printed maps, documents. He looked up when she approached. You mentioned a number, he said. 8, and by tonight. Think carefully. Was there anything after that? Any qualifier? A location, a name? She thought carefully. A word I didn't know. I could spell it phonetically. Do it. She did. Do-hyun wrote it down, showed it to Taejun. Yeongdo, Taejun said. District in Busan. That narrows it, Do-hyun said. Considerably. Taejun looked at Nia. You said the woman, Serin, said, it's already gone. Those exact words, as best you could interpret. As best I could. It was fast and through a wall. But you're confident in that phrase. Confident enough to tell you. He was quiet. Then, the accounts. If the transfer was completed before the ceremony, the trail goes cold in 48 hours. After that, the shell structure they would have used disperses the capital across. He stopped. He was looking at the wall, not at her, working something through. Yeongdo, he said again, quieter. Min Seok has a secondary contact in Busan. Old connection, before my time. I had assumed it was dormant. Assumed, Do-hyun said flatly. An error. Taejun said it without defensiveness, simply an error. One I won't make twice. He looked at his lieutenant. Get me the financial architecture. All of it. The secondary accounts, the shell routing, the overseas server address from the access log. I want it in 2 hours. And Yeongdo? Surveillance first, no contact, not yet. He turned back to Nia. His expression was not warm. It was something more complicated than warm. It was the expression of someone who was recalculating something and had not finished the calculation yet. You've given me information I couldn't have obtained another way. Tonight. You stay here. I have a life, she said, an apartment, a job. Your job ended when a professional shooter made eye contact with you across a ballroom. He saw your face. He will report it. Whether that creates risk for you depends on a number of factors I don't fully know yet, but until I do, staying here is safer than the alternative. She looked at him. He didn't look away. Is that a choice, she said, or is it not a choice? It is a choice, he said. made easier by the fact that the correct choice and the safe choice happened to be the same one. She thought about her apartment in Mapogu. She thought about the shooter's face across the ballroom. She thought about the smell of battery acid at 9 in the morning and how paying attention had brought her here, to this particular hard chair, in this particular salt-smelling building, with this particular man who spoke about catastrophe the way other people spoke about weather. She thought, you noticed, and you didn't walk away. So here you are. All right, she said, one condition. He waited. I need to know what I'm in the middle of, she said. Not everything. I'm not asking for everything, but enough to understand the shape of it. He considered that for a moment. Tomorrow morning, he said, when we have the financial picture and I know more precisely what Min Seok's plan was. Tomorrow morning, I'll tell you the shape of it. She nodded. That night, as Do Hyun's men set up the operations room and the encrypted phones began relaying information from across the city, Nia sat near the industrial window and watched the harbor lights reflect on dark water. Somewhere across the city, a man she'd never seen before tonight had her face stored in memory. Somewhere in Busan, a plan was either succeeding or beginning to fail. And somewhere, a woman who had been scheduled to be married today was moving stolen money through systems designed to make it disappear. She turned the situation over in her mind the way she turned everything over. Not panicking, just examining, testing each edge of it to find out what was solid. She was still examining it when Do Hyun sat down nearby. Not close, but close enough to talk. He doesn't trust easily, Do Hyun said, in case that matters to you. I noticed. What you did tonight, pushing the chair through that room, most people in your position would have called an emergency line and gotten very far away. Most people, she said, hadn't already decided. Do Hyun looked at her sideways. Decided what? She didn't answer right away. Outside the window, a cargo ship was moving slowly along the channel, its running lights low and steady. That sometimes you just know, she said finally, when something is the thing you're supposed to do. Not because it's safe, because it's the one true move in a room full of wrong ones. Do Hyun was quiet for a moment. He said the same thing once, he said, about a decision he made 11 years ago that changed everything. He paused. I wonder if he'd find that coincidental or significant. I wonder too, she said. The cargo ship moved out of frame. The harbor lights continued their slow reflection across the water. Inside the safe house, the operations room hummed with encrypted conversation and the accumulated weight of a crisis that had not yet decided which direction it was going to fall. And upstairs, through the thin walls and the industrial silence, Nia heard the sound of a wheelchair moving back and forth. Steady, measured, the sound of a man who had survived a bombing and a betrayal and an assassination attempt in a single day, and who was not, even now, sitting still. She stayed awake for a long time after that, listening to that sound and thinking about what came next. She had no idea what came next. But she was still here, and she was still paying attention. By 2 in the morning, the financial picture Do Hyun had promised was beginning to take shape, and it was worse than the initial estimates. The access to the secondary accounts had not been a single breach. It had been 4 separate coordinated entries over a period of 6 weeks, each one small enough to avoid the threshold triggers on the monitoring system, each one moving capital through a different routing structure. Min Seok had been building this for months, maybe longer. The infrastructure required to pull this off, the technical access, the legal architecture, the overseas contacts, the timing, this was not something improvised in the weeks after the car bombing. This had been constructed patiently, brick by brick, while Taejun was in Switzerland learning to live without the use of his legs. Taejun sat with the laptop and the printed financials and did not speak for 2 hours while he read. His coffee went cold. No one interrupted him. The men in the room moved around him with the careful precision of people who understood that the man in the chair was doing something more important than anything they could do, and that the best contribution they could make right now was silence and coffee refills. At 3:47 in the morning, he looked up. Find me the Busan contact, he said to Do Hyun. Full profile. I want to know who he talks to, who he owes, and what he's afraid of. By morning? By morning. Do Hyun got on the phone. Taejun looked across the room to where Naya had finally fallen asleep in the folding chair, her head tilted back against the wall, her arms crossed over her chest. She was still wearing the catering jacket with the hospitality logo. She slept the way she did everything else, he thought, without wasted motion. Economically. He looked at the financial documents again. He looked back at her. She had heard a conversation through a partition wall and provided him with the single piece of information, the word Yongdo, that had collapsed a 6-week intelligence failure into a targeting problem with a solution. She had done this not because she knew what she was hearing, but because she listened to everything, all the time, as a matter of habit and survival. He understood that kind of habit. He had built his entire operation on a version of it. He turned back to the laptop. There were $240 million of syndicate capital moving through shell structures toward Busan. And Min Seok believed right now, at 3:47 in the morning, that the man he had tried to have killed was either dead or finished. Kang Tae-jun was neither. He began to type. Outside, the harbor was dark and cold, and the water moved the way it always had, indifferent and constant, and somewhere in the city, the machinery of the Black Phoenix Syndicate, damaged but not broken, bent but not collapsed, was beginning, slowly and deliberately, to turn. The question was not whether Tae-jun would respond. The question, the one that Nia was dreaming of in her folding chair, though she wouldn't remember it in the morning, was what he would find when he pulled the thread all the way to its end. Because there is always a thread, and it always leads somewhere you weren't expecting. And sometimes the person who hands you the thread is someone who was never supposed to be in the room at all. The morning came in gray and cold off the harbor, the kind of light that doesn't so much arrive as accumulate, a slow brightening that turned the corrugated walls of the shipping facility from black to charcoal to the particular washed-out silver of a sky that had decided against committing to anything. Nia woke up with her neck at the wrong angle and a crease from the folding chair's edge pressed into her left forearm, and the immediate, disorienting awareness that the sounds around her were completely wrong for any morning she had previously experienced. Men's voices in Korean. The smell of instant coffee and cigarette smoke and something chemical she couldn't immediately place. The distant sound of water against the hull of something large. She straightened in the chair and looked at the room. The operation setup had expanded overnight. There were now 2 laptops open on the main table, 3 phones charging in a row against the wall, and a printed map of the Busan waterfront district pinned to a section of drywall with a strip of electrical tape. Do Hyun was standing with his back to her, on the phone, speaking in a low, continuous voice that had the cadence of someone relaying instructions rather than receiving them. 2 of the security men she didn't know the names of yet were eating from convenience store containers near the far wall. The refrigerant smell from the catering truck had followed them in on their clothes and mixed with everything else. Tae-jun was exactly where he had been at 3 in the morning at the main table in front of the laptop. He had the same posture, the same stillness. Either he hadn't slept, or he had slept in the chair, and she hadn't noticed, which she doubted, because she had the impression he was not the kind of man who allowed himself to be unnoticed doing anything. She stood up, worked the cramp out of her left shoulder, and walked to the coffee setup near the window. The instant coffee was terrible. She drank it anyway. "There's a bathroom on the 2nd floor, Tae-jun said without looking up. "Second door on the left. There are supplies in the cabinet. How long have you been watching me?" "I haven't been watching you. I heard you stand up." He turned a page on the printed document beside the laptop. "You breathe differently when you wake up." She drank the coffee. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I slept 2 hours. I don't require more. That's not how biology works. My biology and I have had several difficult conversations about what it requires. It's learning to compromise." He looked up then. His eyes were clear, which was either evidence that he was telling the truth about the 2 hours, or evidence that he was very good at performing clarity. She couldn't tell yet which. "The Busan contact has a name. Shin Dae-won. 61 years old, semi-retired, ran import logistics out of Yeongdo for 20 years before transitioning to financial consulting, which in this context means he moves money for people who need it, moved without leaving obvious tracks. Min Seok used him. Min Seok has been using him for 14 months. I know this now. I did not know it before last night, which is a failure of my intelligence operation that I intend to address thoroughly once the immediate problem is resolved." He said this evenly, without self-flagellation, but there was something underneath it, a tightness in the muscles around his jaw. Shindai Wan has a relationship with two separate financial institutions in Macau through which the capital is being routed. The routing completes in 31 hours, and after 31 hours. After 31 hours, the capital disperses into 37 sub-accounts across 4 jurisdictions and becomes, in practical terms, unrecoverable without a multi-year international legal process. She processed that. So 31 hours. 29 now. She drank the rest of the coffee. It was still terrible. Do-hyun ended his call and turned around. He looked at Tae-jun first, then at Nia, and his expression had the quality of a man who had started the morning already carrying something heavy and had just been asked to pick up something heavier. "The scarred man from the ballroom," he said. "His name is Ryu Seong-jin, former Special Forces, discharged 6 years ago under circumstances that were not disclosed. He has been in the employ of a private security firm in Itaewon for the last 3 years. The firm has 4 clients. 2 of them are legitimate. One of them is a shell corporation that traces back to Min Seok through 2 intermediate entities." He paused. "The 4th client is a name I don't recognize, and the shell structure around it is cleaner than anything Min Seok could have built on his own." The room was quiet for a moment. "A partner," Tae-jun said. "Possibly, or a contractor. Someone with more sophisticated financial architecture than Min Seok. Min Seok doesn't have the technical capability to build a 6-week coordinated breach of my account monitoring system." Tae-jun's voice had not changed pitch, but the words were landing with a different weight now. "He has the access. He grew up inside the organization. He knows the structures, but the technical execution of what happened to those accounts requires expertise he doesn't have and has never hired. I've looked at his organizational chart for the last 14 months. There's no one in his circle with that skill set, which means someone built it for him," Do-hyun said. "Which means someone recruited him," Tae-jun said, "or is using him. There's a difference. If someone recruited Min Seok, then Min Seok is a principal. If someone is using him..." He stopped. He looked at the map on the wall. "Then Min Seok is a tool, and the person holding the tool is still unidentified." The security men near the far wall had stopped eating. Everyone in the room was listening now. "That changes the recovery operation," Do-hyun said. "It changes everything," Tae-jun said. "Recovering the money is still the priority. But recovering the money without understanding who built this doesn't end the problem. It just restarts it with a more careful opponent." Nia set down her empty coffee cup. "The key card," she said. Both men looked at her. "You said someone swapped the key card during the pre-wedding dinner. That's a physical operation, but someone had to be close enough to you, at the right moment, with the right cover. That's not a technical skill. That's a social skill. Someone who could be in that room, near you, without triggering your security instinct." She paused. "Who has that kind of access to you in a room like that?" The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. It had a specific texture. The texture of a question that has been in the room for a while and that everyone has been navigating around. Do-hyun looked at the floor. Tae-jun looked at Nia. "Say it plainly," he said. "I'm saying the person who ran the technical side of the account breach and the person who swapped the key card might not be the same person. And if they're not, then you have at least 2 problems inside your organization. Maybe more. I know that. I'm also saying that the person who swapped the card was someone you didn't clock as a threat in a room where your threat assessment was already running. That's a very short list of people. I know that too. So who's on the list?" He looked at her for a long moment. The harbor light through the industrial window was stronger now. It was past 7, and the gray had lifted slightly towards something closer to white. 4 people, he said finally, including Do-hyun. Do-hyun did not react. He had the face of a man who had known this conversation was coming and had decided in advance how he was going to hold himself through it. "Say it out loud," Do-hyun said, "if you need to." "I don't need to say it out loud. I need to know where you were between 9:15 and 9:45 last night at the dinner." "At the perimeter, east side. I have 3 men who can confirm that. 3 men who work for me, or 3 men who work for you." Do-hyun's jaw tightened. "There's no difference." "There was no difference," Tae-jun said. "As of last night, I'm no longer certain the categories are the same thing." The two men looked at each other across the room. It was the look of two people who had been through something significant together. Not friendship exactly, but the kind of mutual history that generates its own gravity. Nia stayed very still near the window and watched, because watching was what she did. And what she was watching was a relationship cracking under the weight of one night's events, and she understood that this kind of crack, once it appeared, did not simply heal. "Verify the three men," Taejun said finally. "Cross-reference with the camera feeds from the dinner venue's security system. Do-hyun handles communications until verification is complete. Nothing sensitive moves through him until I have the answer." "Understood," Do-hyun said. His voice was flat. He turned back to his phone. The verification took 3 hours. During those 3 hours, Nia went upstairs to the second-floor bathroom and used the supplies in the cabinet. A toothbrush still in its packaging, a bar of soap, a clean undershirt 2 sizes too large that someone had left in a plastic bag, and stood at the window of the small room off the corridor and looked at the harbor and thought carefully about what she knew and what she was missing. She was missing most of it, was the honest answer. She had pieces: the conversation through the partition wall, the smell of battery acid, the scarred man's positioning, a word that had turned out to mean a district in Busan. These were fragments. The people in this building had the architecture. She was standing inside a structure whose full shape she couldn't see, and the people who could see it were not yet sure whether to trust her with the view. She thought about calling someone. Her friend Yuna, who she'd worked alongside at the hospitality company for a year, and who would currently be trying to reach her after the chaos at the Hanul Palace. Her building manager, who would notice if she didn't come home. Her mother, who she spoke to every Sunday, which was 2 days away. She didn't call anyone. Her phone was dead. The battery had run out sometime around 4 in the morning, and there was no charger here that fit her model. She told herself this was the reason. She understood, on a quieter level, that it wasn't. She went back downstairs. Mat. Do-hyun's alibi held. The three men were cross-referenced against the venue's camera system by a technician Do-hyun connected to remotely, and Do-hyun appeared in the footage at the east perimeter at 9:17 and did not move from that position until 9:52. The footage was clean, no obvious tampering, time-stamped against the venue's server. Taejun looked at the screenshots for a long time. Then he looked at Do-hyun. The other 3 names on the list. Let's go through them. Do-hyun sat down. For the next hour, they worked through it systematically. Movements, alibis, access levels, behavioral flags from the last 6 months. Nia sat to the side and listened. She wasn't invited into the conversation, but she wasn't excluded from the room, which she read as a form of provisional acceptance. She listened the way she always listened, openly, without deciding in advance what she was going to hear. The 3 other names, a logistics coordinator named Bak, who had been with the organization for 11 years and had 2 children in middle school, a financial analyst in the secondary accounts division named Choi, who had taken 3 unexplained sick days in the last month, and Taejun's personal aide, a young man named Seo-ji Won, who had been managing Taejun's physical needs since the bombing. Scheduling, medication management, equipment maintenance. That last name landed differently than the others. "Equipment maintenance," Nia said. Both men stopped and looked at her. "Seo-ji Won manages your equipment, including the wheelchair." A pause. "He oversees the maintenance schedule," Taejun said. "The actual technical work is done by a vendor. But he coordinates with the vendor. He would know the service intervals. He would know what work had been done recently and what had been deferred. He would know the maintenance access points." Taejun's face was doing something controlled and difficult to read. "He would also know what a magnetic suppressor would affect," he said, "and where to place it. And he's with you constantly," Nia said, "physically close, managing things, touching the chair, the jacket, the personal items." She stopped. "Is he here?" "No," Do-hyun said. "He stayed at the palace. He was coordinating the medical bag and the spare equipment in the groom's suite. I didn't bring him when we left." "Where is he now?" Do-hyun checked his phone. Last contact was at 6 this morning. He texted that he was waiting for instruction. He looked at Taejun. "He hasn't reached out since." "Try him," Taejun said. Do-hyun called. The The call rang 8 times and went to voicemail. Everyone in the room understood what that probably meant. Taejun sat without moving for a long moment. His hands were flat on his thighs. His breathing was controlled and deliberate, and Nia recognized it as the same pattern she'd watched in the preparation suite when he'd discovered the chair was locked. A man who had taught himself to run calm over panic the way you pave over difficult ground. It worked. But underneath the pavement, the ground was still there. Seo Ji-won has been with me for 7 months, he said. Not to anyone in particular. I chose him specifically. His background was clean. His references were personally known to me. Min Seok knew your selection criteria, Do Hyun said. It wasn't gentle, but it wasn't cruel either. It was just true. Yes, Taejun said. He did. Another silence. The financial analyst, Nia said. Choi, the sick days. Choi handles the secondary account structure, Do Hyun said. If someone needed to understand the monitoring thresholds, the exact numbers that would trigger an alert on unusual transactions, Choi would be the person to ask. Or to compromise, she said. 3 sick days, Taejun said, spaced over the last month, corresponding with, he looked at the printed financial timeline on the table, the first, third, and fifth entry points in the account breach. The silence this time had a different quality. It was the silence of something clicking into place. 2 people, Nia said. Ji-won handled the physical access, the key card, the wheelchair. Choi handled the financial technical access. Min Seok had both. And Se-rin handled the social coordination, Do Hyun said. The pre-wedding events, the access management, the guest lists. She would have been able to move people into positions. While the 4th entity, Taejun said, provided the financial architecture and the shooter, Ryu Song-jin. He looked at the map on the wall. Someone above Min Seok. Someone who saw the car bombing as an opportunity to convert my cousin's resentment into an operational asset. Who benefits from the syndicate losing the Black Phoenix leadership, Do Hyun said. Other than Min Seok. Every rival organization that has been held in check for the last 15 years, Taejun said. That's not a short list. Then we narrow it by capability, Nia said. Both men looked at her again. She was aware that she was speaking into a conversation that was not hers by right, only by proximity and the particular accident of last night. But she was also aware that she was seeing something they were too close to see. The 4th entity built clean financial architecture. Min Seok had resentment and access. Se-rin had social access. Ji-won and Choi were compromised assets. The 4th entity provided the technical capability and the muscle, Ryu Song-jin. That's a specific combination of financial sophistication and operational violence. How many organizations in Seoul can put both of those things together? Taejun and Do Hyun looked at each other. 3, Do Hyun said. 2, Taejun said. Hwang's organization has the financial reach, but not the operational discipline. That leaves Shin Jae-ho, Do Hyun said. He said the name the way you say a name you've been avoiding. The room went quiet in a specific way. Even the 2 security men near the wall stilled. Shin Jae-ho has been quiet for 4 years, Taejun said. Quiet isn't gone. No, Taejun said. It isn't. Nia didn't ask who Shin Jae-ho was. She understood from the room that this was not the moment for that question. She filed the name and kept listening. At 11:40 in this morning, one of the security men brought food. Kimbap from a convenience store, bottles of water, more instant coffee. Nia ate near the window and watched Do Hyun work through phone calls that had a progressively tighter, more urgent rhythm. Taejun ate nothing that she saw and drank 2 coffees and kept his eyes on the laptop screen. At 12:15, Do Hyun came to the main table and put his phone face down in a gesture that meant he had something to say that he didn't want interrupted. Shin Dae-won is moving faster than projected, he said. The routing through the Macau institutions is accelerating. Our window is closing. How much did the timeline shift? By about 9 hours. We now have 20 hours, not 29. Taejun looked up from the laptop. His eyes were doing the calculation. The financial counterstrike, Nia said. She had been listening to enough of the operations conversation to understand the rough shape of what Taejun was building. Not a physical recovery operation, but a financial one, using his own contacts and the technical access he still had to the primary accounts to freeze, flag, and disrupt the routing chain before the capital dispersed. Can it execute in 20 hours? 15 of the 20 hours have to be used for legal groundwork, Taejun said. I have 2 contacts in the International Financial Monitoring System who owe me in ways that are not small. If I use both of them simultaneously, we can trigger an automatic investigative hold on the Macau institutions within 12 hours. That freezes the routing before the dispersal. That's burning both contacts, Do-hyun said, permanently. Those relationships don't survive being used. I know. You've had those relationships for 8 years. I know, Taejun said again. His voice had the quality of a man closing a door on a room he used to live in. Start the contact process. I'll handle the calls personally. Encrypted line only. Do-hyun nodded. He picked up the phone. Taejun looked at Nia. You understand financial routing structures. I understand basic ones. My mother's second husband was an accountant. I absorbed things. The shell structure Min-suk is using has a specific vulnerability at the 3rd routing layer. Before I make the calls, I need the chain documented clearly, node by node. The documents are on the laptop. I need a second set of eyes on the documentation to confirm the vulnerability is where I think it is, not a decoy. She looked at him. You want me to check your financial analysis? I want you to look at the chain with no prior assumptions and tell me what you see. Sometimes the value of a new perspective is exactly that. It's new. She sat down across the table from the laptop. He turned it toward her. The documents were complex. Routing diagrams, account numbers partially redacted, institution codes and transaction timestamps. She was not a financial analyst, but she could read a chain of logic, follow a structure from its visible points to where it disappeared, and identify the places where the structure asked her to take something on faith rather than showing her the support. She worked through it for 40 minutes. He sat beside her and said nothing. Here, she said finally. She pointed to the 3rd layer. This node. The transaction volumes don't match the institution's stated processing capacity. It's moving more than it should be able to, which means either the capacity figures are wrong or there's a secondary processor running underneath the declared one. Secondary processor, he said immediately. It's an old structure. Pre-2015. Used before the Macau regulatory reforms. If you know it exists, you can flag it directly to the monitoring system without going through the primary institution. Which means instead of freezing at the institution level, we freeze at the processor level. The dispersal can't complete if the processor is flagged because the processor is the mechanism the dispersal uses. He looked at the diagram. A pause. I missed that. I was looking at the institution layer. You've been awake for 36 hours, she said. That's not an excuse. I didn't say it was. I said it was a reason. He looked at her. The light from the window was behind her, and it turned the edges of her profile into something stark and clear. He did not look away immediately, the way he usually processed useful information quickly and moved on. He stayed with it for a moment. The fact of her, in this room, at this table, reading a financial diagram she had no business being able to read, after a night she had no business surviving. Thank you, he said. She nodded. She did not make it soft or deflect it. She took it directly, which was, he thought, exactly right. The calls took 3 hours. Taejun handled them in a side room off the main floor, a concrete walled space with a folding table and a single overhead light, while Do-hyun managed the documentation process, and Nia stayed at the main table and reviewed the remaining financial chain, marking anything else that felt inconsistent. She found 2 more anomalies. She wrote them down on a piece of paper and set it next to the laptop. At 3:40 in the afternoon, Taejun came back into the main room. His jaw was tight and his collar was open, and he looked, for the first time since she'd met him, like a man who had done something costly. It's done, he said. Both contacts activated. The processor flag goes into the monitoring system in 6 hours. The hold triggers automatically after that. The dispersal, Do-hyun said, won't complete. The capital freezes at the 3rd layer. He looked at the piece of paper beside the laptop. He picked it up, read it, set it back down. 2 more anomalies. The second one might be a decoy, Nia said. I'm not sure, but the first one is real. It's the same structure as the processor issue. Older architecture, pre-reform, someone who knows the system before it was modernized. Shin Jae-ho's financial architect has been in the business for 30 years, Do-hyun said. He would know every pre-reform structure. Then this was built by someone who wanted it to look like Min Seok's work, Tae-jun said, but is actually older and more sophisticated than anything Min Seok could have commissioned. He set the paper down. We weren't just robbed. We were framed. The intent was not just to take the money. The intent was to take the money in a way that looked like internal betrayal, which would fracture the organization while the real actor remained invisible. The room held that understanding for a moment. If you hadn't found the processor, Do-hyun said to Nia, the flag would have gone in at the institution level, Tae-jun said. It would have looked like it worked. The money would have dispersed anyway through the processor, and we wouldn't have understood why the freeze failed until it was too late to recover. Nia looked at the diagram on the laptop. Min Seok doesn't know about the processor, she said. It wasn't a question. Probably not, Tae-jun said. He was given the structure to use. He wasn't told everything about how it worked. He was a vehicle. Then when the freeze goes in and the capital stops moving, Min Seok is going to think something went wrong on his end. He's going to reach out to the fourth entity. She looked up. That's a communication you could intercept. Tae-jun looked at her steadily. It's also, Do-hyun said quietly, a communication that will tell the fourth entity that the freeze happened. And if they understand what that means, they'll know someone found the processor, Tae-jun said, which means they'll know the operation is compromised. He was looking at the map on the wall, the Busan waterfront, Yeongdo. Which means they'll move. How fast, Nia said. Fast, he said. Shin Jae-ho does not wait when a situation becomes exposed. He acts. He looked at Do-hyun. If he concludes the processor was found, what does he do? He cuts Min Seok loose, Do-hyun said. Immediately. Min Seok becomes the exposed party. All the evidence points to him. None of it points to Shin Jae-ho. Min Seok takes the consequences. And Serin, Nia said. Both men looked at her. Serin is with Min Seok. If Min Seok gets cut loose, Serin is a liability to Shin Jae-ho, Tae-jun said. He said it the same way he said everything, evenly, without visible emotion. But Nia watched his hands, and his hands on the armrests of the chair had a stillness to them that was different from his usual stillness. It was the stillness of someone controlling something specific, rather than someone who was naturally at rest. She thought, whatever Serin did, whoever she chose and whatever she took, he doesn't want her dead. She didn't say that out loud. The intercept window, she said instead. When does Min Seok reach out? Within an hour of the freeze triggering, Do-hyun said. Maybe sooner. He'll be monitoring the routing. Then we have 7 hours, Tae-jun said. 6 until the freeze, 1 after. 7 total before the fourth entity moves. He looked at Do-hyun. Get me a tap on Min Seok's known communication channels. All of them. I want the intercept live before the freeze triggers. That requires... I know what it requires. Do it. Do-hyun left the room. Tae-jun turned back to the laptop. Nia sat across the table from him and did not speak for a while. Outside, the harbor had moved into the flat gray light of a winter afternoon, the water turning dull and metallic. A container ship was anchored in the channel, motionless, waiting for a berth. You're thinking about Serin, she said. He didn't deny it. I'm thinking about a number of things. I know, but you're thinking about her specifically. He looked up. His eyes were clear and unreadable in the specific way of someone who has decided not to show you the thing you're asking about. She was in that conversation you overheard, he said. She said it's already gone. You're wondering what that means about what she knew and when she knew it. That's not what I'm wondering, Nia said. I know what she knew. She helped plan it. The question is whether she understood what happens when Shin Jae-ho decides she's a liability. A pause. She's not my concern, he said. You practice saying that. His jaw moved, just slightly. Miss Brooks. Nia. Nia. He said the name like he was placing it somewhere in the structure of things. What I feel about Serin's choices is not relevant to the operational situation. I agree, she said. I'm not asking about what you feel. I'm asking whether the operational situation includes getting her out before Shin Jae-ho makes that call. The room was very quiet. She stole $240 million, he said. She helped plan my assassination. She colluded with a man who is trying to destroy everything I built. Yes, Naya said, and she might die for it in the next 7 hours. He looked at the map on the wall. Yeongdo, the Busan waterfront, the harbor outside with its motionless ship. The intercept, he said finally. When we get Min Seok's communication, we'll know their location. After that, the operation's objective is the frozen capital and the identification of Shin Jae-ho's financial architect. He stopped. If Seirin's location is determinable from that information, I'll make a separate assessment. It was not a yes. It was also not a no. It was the language of a man who had closed a door on a room and was standing with his hand still on the handle. Nia nodded. She let it go. At 6:47 in the evening, the processor flag entered the international monitoring system, and at 7:12, the capital stopped moving at the third routing layer. At 7:29, Min Seok made the call. The tap was live. Do-hyun had the audio running on a portable receiver, translated in real time by a member of the team with a flat, rapid voice that layered over the recorded voices like a film's dubbing slightly out of sync. Taejun and Nia and Do-hyun stood around the receiver and listened. Min Seok's voice was agitated, tighter than she'd expected from someone who had spent 8 months building a plan. There was a quality to it, not quite fear, but the anticipation of fear, the voice of a man who has realized the ground under him is not as solid as it was. He was trying to reach the fourth entity. The number he called rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, low, unhurried, the voice of a man who received bad news from a position of complete insulation. The translator said, "You failed to confirm the routing completed." Min Seok, there's a problem with the third layer. The processor... A pause. The low voice. The processor was flagged. Silence. The low voice. Who else knows about the structure? Min Seok and the translator had a flat quality reading this, but Nia heard the shape of the original panic underneath the rendering. No one. Only the people on our side. The low voice. Then someone on your side told someone else. That's impossible. The arrangement is concluded, the low voice said. Clean up your exposure. The call ended. Clean up your exposure. In the silence after the call, the phrase sat in the room like a thing with weight. Clean up your exposure, Do-hyun said. The words came out quiet and specific. Tae-jun's jaw was set. His hands were on the armrests. Seirin, Nia said. And Ji-won, Do-hyun said. And Choi, anyone who can place the fourth entity. He'll move in the next 2 hours, Tae-jun said. His voice was very controlled. The Busan location. Yeongdo. How fast can we get there? 90 minutes if we leave now, Do-hyun said. But the road approach, not the road. The water approach requires a boat. Then get a boat, Tae-jun said. And then, with something that was not quite hesitation, but was close to it, get 2. We go to Yeongdo. All of us. Nia looked at him. You're coming, he said. Not a question. I know Yeongdo, she said. I did a hospitality event at the waterfront 2 months ago. I know the layout of the district. He looked at her. In the dim light of the operations room, his expression was complicated in a way that she was only beginning to learn how to read. The particular combination of calculation and something older and less deliberate that appeared when he wasn't fully managing what was showing. 2 hours, he said. Shin Jae-ho's people will be in Yeongdo in 2 hours to clean the location. He looked at Do-hyun. We need to be there first. Do-hyun was already on the phone. Nia looked at the map on the wall. The Busan waterfront. The district they were racing toward. The invisible line between what had been decided in this room and what was waiting at the other end of a 90-minute water crossing in the dark. She had said okay twice today to things that should have made her run. She understood that she was about to say it a third time, and that this time, unlike the others, there was no corridor to escape through, no service entrance, no maid's invisibility to hide behind. Whatever was in Yeongdo was going to see her coming. The boat engine started somewhere below and the sound of it rose through the boat was a retrofitted harbor tender, wide-hulled, low in the water, smelling of diesel and salt, and the particular staleness of a vessel that spent most of its time tied to a dock. Do-hyun had sourced it in 40 minutes from a contact he described only as reliable, which in context meant someone who asked no questions and expected the same courtesy in return. There were 6 of them aboard, Taejun, Nia, Do-hyun, and 3 security men whose names she had learned in the last hour. Cheon, Baek, and a younger one everyone called Sam for reasons nobody explained. The crossing from Incheon to Busan was not a 90-minute trip by water. It was several hours, which meant Do-hyun had arranged a transfer point, a smaller harbor 40 kilometers south of Incheon, where a second vehicle was waiting to cover the road distance before a final short water approach into Yeongdo from the Eastern Channel. The logistics were complicated in a way that Nia absorbed without commenting on, because the complication was necessary, and commenting on it served nothing. She sat near the stern and watched the lights of the coastline move past in the dark. Taejun was at the bow, facing forward, not speaking. Do-hyun stood near the wheelhouse with Cheon, going over something on a tablet that cast blue light up across their faces. The engine was loud enough that private conversation required effort, which meant the crossing happened mostly in silence, which meant Nia had time to think, which was not entirely to her benefit. She was thinking about the phrase, "clean up your exposure." She was thinking about Seirin, who was 29 years old and had been educated in Paris, and had agreed to marry a man she barely knew as part of a strategic arrangement, and had then, at some point between the agreement and the altar, made a different calculation. Nia had tried to build a complete picture of that calculation on the boat, using what she knew and what she could infer, and the picture she arrived at was not one that made Seirin a simple villain. It was more complicated than that. It was the picture of a person who had looked at a future that had been decided for her without her input and had decided to take a different future by force, using the tools available to her, and had badly misjudged who she was in business with. That misjudgment was now potentially fatal. Nia did not like Seirin. She did not know Seirin, but she understood, with a clarity that came from having grown up watching people make desperate choices from limited options, that understanding someone's situation was not the same as approving of what they did with it. Seirin had done genuinely harmful things. She had also walked into a situation that was now significantly more dangerous than she had been told it would be. The boat hit a swell and lurched. Nia put her hand on the railing. From the bow, without turning around, Taejun said, "There's a handhold on the bench to your left." She found it. The crossing continued. They reached the transfer point at 11:40. The vehicle was a dark panel van with commercial plates, the kind that moved through industrial districts without generating attention. Taejun's chair was secured in the back with cargo straps Do-hyun had brought specifically for this. Nobody spoke much during the road section. The driver, another of Do-hyun's contacts, another person who asked nothing, kept his eyes on the road and the radio off. Nia watched the landscape change from coastal to industrial to urban as they moved south and then east toward Busan. The city materializing in pieces, lights first, then the shapes of buildings, then the particular density of a port city at midnight, when the docks were still working and the streets around them were mostly empty, and the air smelled like the sea and like industry in equal measure. Yeongdo was an island district connected to the mainland by a bridge, and Do-hyun had the approach mapped, not the bridge which had cameras, but a water route from the Eastern Channel using a second harbor tender that was already waiting at a dock in Namgu. They boarded it at 12:40. The final crossing was 12 minutes. In those 12 minutes, Taejun spoke. "The property in Yeongdo," he said. He was looking at the tablet Do-hyun held angled toward him, a satellite image showing a cluster of older commercial buildings near the waterfront. "This is where Shindae-won operates." "Operated," Do-hyun said. "He may have already moved." "If he moved, the capital is already dispersed." "The freeze should have held." "Should," Taejun said. The word had an edge to it. Nia looked at the satellite image. The buildings were older structures, the kind of low-profile commercial property that existed in every port district in every coastal city in the world, unremarkable by design, useful precisely because nothing about them suggested they contained anything worth looking at. "Which building?" she said. "The third from the waterfront edge. It's listed as a marine equipment storage facility. Shindae-won's company holds the lease." She looked at the image. "The alley between the second and third building, is it accessible from the water side?" Do-hyun zoomed the image. "There's a service dock on the eastern face. Small. It could take this boat." "Then that's the approach," she said. "If there are people inside watching the main waterfront access, The service dock is an angle they'd deprioritize. Taijun looked at her. In the dark of the harbor tender, with the Busan lights growing ahead of them, his face was all angles and shadow. "You've done this before," he said. "I've never done anything like this before," she said. "Then where does it come from?" She thought about it honestly. "My brother Marcus. He used to say that in any bad situation, the right move is usually the one that everyone else forgot to watch. Not because people are stupid, because people watch the things they expect. The rest goes unguarded." Taejun was quiet for a moment. "Marcus sounds like someone who learned things the difficult way." "He did," she said. "He's also still alive, which suggests the education worked." The boat angled toward the eastern channel. The service dock was unguarded. That was the first thing, and it registered immediately as either good luck or something worse. She untied the boat, and Do-hyun went first, moving along the dock wall with the particular economy of motion that came from real tactical training rather than the performed version. Sam followed. Then Baek, then Nia, who had been told to stay close to Do-hyun and not move independently, instruction she accepted without argument because she was not stupid, and this was not a situation for argument. Taejun came last. The dock was wide enough for the chair, barely, and the surface was rough composite that required more resistance from the drive motor than smooth floors. He navigated it without assistance and without asking for any, and nobody offered. The service entrance to the third building was a steel door, heavy gauge, with a keypad lock that Cheon bypassed in under 2 minutes, using a device from his jacket that Naya did not look at too closely. The door opened into a narrow corridor, concrete floor, bare overhead tubes running on a motion-sensitive circuit that flickered on as they entered. The building was cold, the kind of cold that collected in spaces that weren't heated for human comfort. Raw, industrial cold, with a damp undertone from the proximity to water. The corridor ran 30 feet and then opened into a larger storage area where metal shelving units held equipment that looked genuinely like marine storage. Rope coils, navigation equipment in padded cases, maintenance materials. And behind the shelving, through a secondary door that was not locked, a staircase going down. Do-hyun looked at Taejun. Taejun looked at the staircase. "The chair," Do-hyun said, quietly. Just those 2 words. "There's a freight lift at the end of the main corridor," Nia said. She had looked at the building layout on the satellite image during the crossing and had been constructing the interior geometry since they entered. Service buildings this age in Yeongdo were built with freight access to basement levels for cold storage. Fishing industry. The lift should be at the north end. She was right. The freight lift was there. Large enough for the chair, old enough to groan when Do-hyun engaged it, slow enough that the 30 seconds of descent felt like considerably longer. The basement level was not cold storage. It was a room, medium-sized, maybe 40 feet by 30, with the kind of temporary fit-out that suggested it had been configured for a specific use and with the intention of being reconfigured or abandoned quickly. 2 folding tables, laptops, a portable router setup, filing boxes stacked against the far wall. And in the center of the room, visible the moment the lift door opened, 2 figures. The first was a man Nia didn't recognize. Heavy set, 60s, the face of someone who had spent a career being useful and forgettable, which matched the profile of Shin Dae-won that Do-hyun had described. The second was Serin. She was sitting in a chair near the table, and she was not restrained, but the quality of her stillness suggested she had understood recently that her options had narrowed to the point where movement felt pointless. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on, somewhere, at some point before the ceremony, the last time she'd been visible in the footage Do-hyun had pulled. Her hair was loose. Her eyes were clear, which Nia found surprising and then found herself understanding. Serin was not a person who fell apart when things went wrong. She was a person who had been waiting for something to arrive and had decided to be composed when it did. What arrived was Kang Tae-jun in a wheelchair, with Do-hyun and 3 armed men and a black woman in a catering jacket, at 1 in the morning in a basement in Yeongdo. Shin Dae-won's reaction was immediate and physical. He pushed back from the table and his hand went toward something on his person, and Cheon crossed the room in 3 steps and had his arm behind his back before the hand reached whatever it was going toward, and that was the end of that movement. Serin looked at Taejun. Taejun looked at Serin. The silence lasted long enough to have texture. "You're not dead," Serin said. Her voice was steady. Not cold, not warm. Steady. The voice of someone making an accurate observation. No, Taijun said. Min Seok said the wheelchair was fixed, that you wouldn't... She stopped. Something moved behind her eyes. Someone told you. Someone noticed, he said. He did not look at Nia. Where is Min Seok? She looked at the floor. He left 4 hours ago, when the routing stopped moving. He said he was going to reach the fourth contact and get instructions. He got instructions, Taejun said. He was told to clean his exposure. Seren looked up. Something shifted in her face, a tightening, not of fear exactly, but of a person making very fast calculations in real time. You intercepted the call, she said. Yes. Then you know what clean up your exposure means. I do. Then you know, she said, and her voice was still steady, but now there was something underneath the steadiness, a hairline fracture in the composure, that Min Seok is going to come here. Not to rescue you, Taijun said. No, she said, not to rescue me. The room held that. Nia watched Seren's face and understood something. This was not a woman who hadn't known the risks. This was a woman who had understood the risks and had proceeded anyway, had made a calculation about how much control she had over the situation, and was now confronting the fact that she had miscalculated the part that mattered most. The money, the escape, the new life somewhere, all of that had been real. The part she'd miscalculated was Shin Jae-ho, who had used Min Seok and therefore had used Seren, and who cleaned his exposures without sentiment. The money, Do-hyun said to Shin Dae-won, whose arm Cheon was still holding. Where is the frozen capital in the routing chain? Shin Dae-won said nothing. His face was arranged into the expression of a man who had decided that whatever came next was preferable to what would happen if he talked. Do-hyun looked at Taejun. Taejun wheeled forward 2 feet. He looked at Shin Dae-won with the same expression he had used on the financial documents, on the map, on everything. Unhurried, calibrated. The look of a man who understood time as a resource and managed it accordingly. You're 61, Taejun said. You have a daughter in Daejeon and a son in Canada. The son has a permanent residency application pending. The daughter's husband works in a position that requires a clean background certification every 2 years. He paused. I'm not threatening your family. I am describing the shape of your life so that you understand I've read the whole of it, not just the parts that brought you to this room. You can decide whether the fourth entity's protection is worth what cooperation with me would cost you. You have 60 seconds to make that decision. Take them seriously. Shin Dae-won looked at him for a long moment. His face ran through several expressions in sequence. Then he talked. It took 22 minutes. Shin Dae-won talked the way men talked, when they had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and found, when the weight was finally lifted, that the relief of not carrying it was greater than the fear of what happened next. He talked about the routing structure, about the processor, about the 48 months he had been running financial architecture for Shin Jae-ho's organization as a contractor rather than a member, maintaining the fiction of independence that kept his name off the visible organizational charts. He talked about Min Seok, who had been introduced to him 14 months ago through an intermediary, and whose plan Shin Jae-ho had refined and resourced. He talked about the technical access. Choi, the financial analyst, had been approached not through Min Seok, but directly by one of Shin Jae-ho's people, which meant the compromise of the account monitoring system had happened outside Min Seok's knowledge. Min Seok had believed he was the architect. He had been the face. And then Shin Dae-won said something that changed the shape of everything. The aide, he said. The personal aide. Seo Ji-won. We know about Ji-won, Do-hyun said. You know he swapped the keycard, Shin Dae-won said. You don't know how long he's been with Shin Jae-ho's organization. A pause. How long? Taejun said. His voice was exactly the same. It was always exactly the same. But Nia saw his right hand on the armrest, and it was pressing down with a pressure that was not casual. 7 years, Shin Dae-won said. He was placed 2 years before the bombing. The bombing wasn't orchestrated by an unknown enemy. He looked at Taejun. Shin Jae-ho ordered the bombing. Ji-won provided the route information, the motorcade path, the timing, the security gaps. The room went completely still. Nia stopped breathing for a moment. She was aware of doing it. The involuntary pause before the body processes something too large to absorb in motion. Do-hyun's face had gone to a place she hadn't seen it go before. Not anger. Something past anger. Something gray and controlled and dangerous. Taejun did not move. Did not speak. His hand on the armrest pressed down and pressed down and pressed down, and then released. "The bombing," Do-hyun said. His voice was very quiet. "Shin Jae-ho has been inside this organization for 7 years. Ji-won reports directly to Jae-ho's senior operative. The aide role was an opportunity. It wasn't originally planned, but when you needed someone after the bombing, when your requirements were specific, Ji-won was positioned." "Positioned," Tae-jun said. "One word. He managed your rehabilitation schedule, your medication, your equipment maintenance." Shin Dae-won looked at the table. He was no longer a man who had decided to talk. He was a man who understood that he was dismantling something room by room and could not stop once he'd started. He had complete access to your physical situation, your vulnerabilities, your daily patterns. "The suppressor on the chair," Do-hyun said. "Ji-won." "Yes." "He was supposed to be at the palace suite," Tae-jun said, "when we left." "He wasn't waiting for instruction," Do-hyun said, and his voice had changed. Not loud, quieter, if anything. "The text at 6 this morning. I want to see the number it came from." He pulled up his phone. He looked at the number. He looked at Tae-jun. "That number," Tae-jun said. "It's not Ji-won's registered phone," Do-hyun said. "It's a burner. He sent confirmation that he was waiting," Tae-jun said. "So we would leave the palace believing he was contained. And instead he's—" Do-hyun stopped. Nia said it. "He's already told Shin Jae-ho that the wheelchair suppressor failed, that you survived." The sentence landed in the room with the particular weight of information that rearranges everything around it. Tae-jun looked at her. In his eyes there was something she had not seen before. Not fear, but the specific look of a man who has just understood the full geometry of a trap and is measuring the distance between where he stands and the nearest exit. "Shin Jae-ho has known since this morning that I'm alive," he said. "And that you left Seoul," Do-hyun said. "And probably that we're moving toward Busan, if Ji-won had enough access to track the communications channels." "The encrypted line," Tae-jun said. "The calls I made this afternoon. The contacts." Do-hyun looked at the phone. "The encrypted line routes through a relay in the safe house. If Ji-won had access to the safe house communications architecture, he managed the setup," Tae-jun said. "When we built the safe house network 6 months ago, Ji-won coordinated the technical vendors. The silence this time was not the silence of understanding. It was the silence of a structure collapsing in slow motion, each piece of it discovered and named as it fell." "The contacts I burned," Tae-jun said. "The 2 I used for the processor flag. If Shin Jae-ho intercepted those calls, he knows who they are." "He can apply pressure to them," Do-hyun said, "before the flag goes active." "How long?" Tae-jun said. Do-hyun looked at his watch. "The flag was scheduled to trigger at 1900. It's now 1:20. If Jae-ho has been moving since this morning, he's had 6 hours," Tae-jun said. 6 hours is enough." Nia looked between them. "Is the flag already live?" "It should be," Do-hyun said. He was on his phone. He navigated, called a number, waited. The call did not connect. He tried a second number, same result. He looked at Tae-jun. "Both contacts are unreachable," Tae-jun said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Then the flag may not have triggered. Or it triggered, and the contacts are being managed." "Managed," Nia said. Do-hyun looked at her. "Persuaded to withdraw the flag. Shin Jae-ho has his own contacts in the monitoring system. If he moved fast enough, then the capital is moving again," Tae-jun said. The quiet stretched. Serin, from her chair, said, "The secondary processor, the one your woman found in the routing chain. Shin Jae-ho doesn't know about the flag on the processor specifically. He knows about the institution-level flag. He would have worked to suppress the institution flag. But the processor flag—" Everyone looked at her. She looked at Tae-jun. "I saw the routing architecture. Min-sok showed me. There was no mention of the secondary processor as a flag point. It wasn't in the original plan. If your woman found it independently—" She stopped. She looked at Nia. "If you found it after the plan was built, Shin Jae-ho's suppression effort is targeting the wrong layer." Nia held Seirin's gaze for a moment. The two women looked at each other across a room in a basement in Busan at 1 in the morning, and the look contained a complicated amount of information. "She's right," Nia said to Taejun. "The processor flag was filed separately. Different system, different contact. It went through the same contacts, but as a different filing category. If Shin Jae-ho's people are suppressing the institution flag, they may not even know the processor flag exists." "May not," Taejun said. "May not," she said. "We don't know." "We need to know," he said. "We need to access the monitoring system directly and confirm the processor flag status." "That requires a terminal with system access," Do-hyun said. "Not a phone, a secure system terminal." "Shin-dae-won," Taejun said. The older man looked up. "You have a terminal here with monitoring system access. You've been using it to track the routing status." Shin-dae-won looked at the laptops on the table. The calculation behind his eyes was brief. "Yes," he said. "Show me." The terminal access took 11 minutes to establish. Shin Dae-won navigated the system under Do-hyun's observation, and Nia stood beside Taejun and looked at the screen as the routing status loaded. The institution-level flag had been suppressed, withdrawn at 2214, bearing a reference code that indicated regulatory review compliance. The bureaucratic language of a system being told to stand down by someone with the authority to tell it. The processor flag was still active. The capital was frozen at the third routing layer and had not moved. The relief in the room was physical. Do-hyun let out a breath. Sam, by the door, shifted his weight. Even Shin Dae-won's shoulders dropped slightly. Taejun looked at the screen for a long moment. Then, "How long can the processor flag hold without the supporting contact?" 72 hours before it requires reconfirmation, Shin Dae-won said. "After that, it lapses automatically." 72 hours, Do-hyun said. "That's enough time to file through legitimate channels if we—" The lights went out. Not the laptop screen. The laptop continued its cold glow. But the overhead fixtures killed in the same instant, and in the following second, before anyone spoke or moved, Nia heard something that she had heard once before in her life and never forgotten. A sound like a door being opened carefully, and then another, and then multiple sets of feet on the floor above them, moving with the specific cadence of people who had been trained not to sound like people moving. She grabbed Tae-jun's armrest. Not his arm, the chair. "The lift," she said very quietly. "They'll have the lift," Do-hyun said. He had a weapon out. She hadn't seen him draw it. It was simply there. "The staircase," Taejun said. "You said, I know what I said." He looked at the freight lift, dark now, without power. Looked at the staircase door across the room. "The chair navigates stairs if someone assists the front wheels." Do-hyun. "That puts us in the corridor with no exit option if they're already—" "Then we move before they reach the corridor." He looked at Nia. "Can you take the rear of the chair on the stairs and maintain control on the ascent?" She looked at the staircase door, looked at him. "Yes." Do-hyun takes point. "Cheon and Baek follow us. Sam stays here with Shin Dae-won and—" He stopped. He looked at Se-rin. Se-rin was standing. She had moved from the chair sometime in the last 30 seconds without anyone tracking it, and she was standing near the table with her hands at her sides and her face arranged into the expression of someone who has been waiting for a decision to be made about her and is done waiting. "Take her," Nia said. Taejun looked at Nia. "Whatever she did," Nia said, "she just told us about the processor flag, and the people coming through that door are not making distinctions." A beat. One beat. "Sam," Taejun said. "Se-rin comes with us. Shin Dae-won stays. He's more useful answering questions than creating complications." Sam moved to Se-rin's side. Se-rin looked at Taejun with an expression Nia couldn't fully read. Not gratitude exactly, or not only gratitude. Something more complicated than that. Something that had 15 years of a different history underneath it. They moved toward the stairs. Do-hyun went through the door first, fast and low, and cleared the immediate landing before signaling. The sounds from above had multiplied. She could hear at least 4 distinct sets of movement, possibly more. They were being systematic, which meant they were professionals. which meant the window between now and the moment those professionals reached the basement level was not a window she could afford to think about too carefully. She took the rear handles of Tae-jun's chair. The stairs were concrete, 12 steps, the chair heavy and uncooperative at the angle. She felt the weight through her arms and shoulders immediately. Real weight, not manageable with one hand, requiring both and requiring her to commit her full center of gravity against the pull of physics. She took the first step. He said nothing, did not instruct her, did not guide. He held himself upright and still in the chair and let her work, which she understood was its own form of trust. The trust of someone who had learned in 7 months of being managed by a traitor not to give people the opportunity to make decisions about his body, and who was giving her that opportunity anyway. 3 steps. 4. Do-hyun was at the top of the landing, watching the corridor. 6 steps. 7. Baek was behind her, his hand briefly on the chair's frame to help balance a tilt, and she let him, because pride was not a resource available right now. 9 steps. 10. Do-hyun's voice from the top, very quiet. Clear, for now. 11. 12. They came through the staircase door into the ground floor corridor, and for approximately 4 seconds the corridor was empty and the path to the service dock was open, and Nia allowed herself exactly 4 seconds of something that was not relief, but was adjacent to it. Then the door at the far end of the corridor opened. Ryu Seong-jin stepped through it. The scar ran white along his jaw in the dim emergency lighting that had kicked on at floor level. He was not carrying a champagne glass this time. He looked at them. At Do-hyun, at the security men, at the chair, at Nia. And his expression was that of a professional making an assessment rather than a person reacting to a surprise. Behind him, 3 more men. Do-hyun raised his weapon. Ryu Seong-jin did not raise his. He looked past Do-hyun directly at Tae-jun and said, in a voice that carried a distance clearly, "Shin Jae-ho wants to speak with you." Tae-jun said nothing. "Not a negotiation," Ryu said. "A conversation. He says there are things you don't know yet about why this started. He says if you hear them, you'll understand why continuing isn't in either party's interest." "Shin Jae-ho ordered the bombing," Tae-jun said. "He put a man inside my organization for 7 years. He tried to have me killed at my own wedding." His voice was the same voice it always was. Nia had stopped being surprised by that. What would he like me to understand about why that started? Ryu Seong-jin looked at him. There was something in the look, not discomfort, but the expression of someone who has been given a message to deliver and is aware that the message is incomplete. "He says," Ryu said, "that the bombing was not the beginning, that you already know what the beginning was, that you've always known. You just never asked the right question." The corridor held the words. Nia looked at Tae-jun. His face was absolutely still. But she had learned, in the last 18 hours, to read the quality of his stillness, and what she read now was not the stillness of control over nothing. It was the stillness of a man containing something very large, something that had been large for a long time, and that had just shifted its weight inside. Nobody moved. The corridor held them all in a specific arrangement. Do-hyun with his weapon raised, Ryu Seong-jin with his hands visible and his 3 men behind him, Tae-jun in the chair with the corridor's emergency floor lighting throwing shadows upward across everyone's faces in ways that made them look carved from something harder than flesh. Nia stood behind the chair with both hands still on the handles and her heart doing something she could feel in her back teeth. The words hung in the air between them. "You've always known. You just never asked the right question." Tae-jun looked at Ryu Seong-jin for a long time. Long enough that Do-hyun's arm, still extended with the weapon, began to show the first tremor of sustained tension at the shoulder joint. "Where?" Tae-jun said. "The wedding hall," Ryu said. "Hanul Palace. He went back. He's in Seoul. He's been in Seoul since this morning. He said you'd understand why. He said the location would matter to you." "It's a trap," Do-hyun said. He said it flat, no question mark, the way you state a physical law. "Probably," Tae-jun said. "Then we're not—" "I didn't say we weren't going." He looked at Do-hyun. "Lower the weapon." "Tae-jun, I said lower it." Do-hyun lowered it. His jaw was set in a way that communicated everything his voice wasn't saying. Taejun looked at Ryu Seongjin. Tell him I'll be there. Midnight. Ryu nodded once. Then he and his 3 men moved back through the door at the end of the corridor, and it closed behind them, and the emergency lighting continued its low orange hum, and everyone in the corridor started breathing again, in the specific way of people who had been holding breath without meaning to. Sarin, from behind Sam's shoulder, said, You're going to walk into it. I'm not walking anywhere, Taejun said. He looked at Nia. His eyes were doing the calculation she had come to recognize, the rapid processing of variables, the weighing of things she couldn't see. Get us back to the boat. She pushed the chair. Oops. The crossing back was faster because Do-hyun pushed the tender's engine harder than the harbor speed limit technically permitted, and nobody on the water at 2 a.m. was enforcing anything. Nia sat near the bow this time, facing the direction of travel, watching the coast come toward them rather than recede. The wind off the water was cold enough to make her eyes water, and she let it, because the cold was clarifying and she needed clarity right now more than comfort. Taejun was beside her. He had moved the chair to the bow position without explanation, and she had understood that the explanation was that he wanted to think without being observed from behind, which required facing forward, which required the bow. The beginning, she said. Not loudly. The engine was loud enough that the conversation was private by default. He looked at the water. You know what he means, she said. The right question. A long pause. The coast lights moved. My father built the Black Phoenix Syndicate on Incheon Dock territory, he said. When I was 23 and he was moving the organization into more sophisticated operations, there was a restructuring. Several of the original dock network partners were bought out, given settlements, and released. He stopped. One of them contested the buyout, said the valuation was manipulated, said he was owed considerably more than he received. Shin Jae-ho, she said, his father. Shin Jae-ho inherited the grievance along with everything else. He looked at her. The wind moved across his face and he didn't react to it. The car bombing, the 7 years of infiltration, the wedding. This, he made a small gesture that encompassed the boat, the water, the whole night. All of it is a collection on a debt that is 20 years old and that I had nothing to do with creating. But you inherited it, she said, along with everything else. Yes, she thought about that. Does knowing that change anything? No, he said. It explains the shape of it. It doesn't change what has to happen now, which is, I go to Hanul Palace at midnight, I hear what he has to say, and then I finish it. How? He looked at the approaching coastline. Min Seok declared himself the new leader of the Black Phoenix Syndicate. The allied organizations are waiting to see whether he can hold that declaration or whether it collapses. If I arrive at the wedding hall and Min Seok is there, which he will be, because Shin Jae-ho will have brought him, because Min Seok is still useful as a face even now, then the declaration happens in front of whoever Shin Jae-ho has brought as witnesses. Imaz de Boshi. He paused. And it unravels in front of them. You said it might be a trap. It is definitely a trap, he said. The question is whether I can make the trap work for me instead of against me. She looked at him. And if you can't? He said nothing. I'm asking seriously, she said, not rhetorically. I know, he said. I don't have an answer for the if I can't version. I have an answer for the version where I go and it works. That's the version I'm planning. The boat hit a swell, and spray came over the bow and caught them both, and she felt it cold across her face and hands and didn't move. He didn't move either. They sat wet and cold in the bow of a harbor tender in the dark, and she thought, this is what it looks like to move towards something with no guarantee. This exact thing. This particular cold and dark. I'm coming, she said. He looked at her. To the palace, she said, I know the building, the layout, the service corridors. If something goes wrong at Hanul Palace, he said, knowing the service corridors will not be sufficient. Probably not, she said. I'm still coming. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked back at the water. All right, he said. They had 9 hours. Do-hyun used 6 of them running communications, reaching every loyal element of the Black Phoenix network still in Seoul, positioning people around the Hanul Palace perimeter without tipping the hand that the meeting was anything other than what Ryu Seongjin had said it was. The remaining 3 hours, Taejun spent on the encrypted line talking to 2 organizational lieutenants whose loyalty Do Hyun had personally verified against the Jiwon contamination. The financial picture was revised, the processor flag confirmed still active. The frozen capital remained frozen. Nia slept for 2 hours in the back of the panel van during the road section of the return. She slept the way she had trained herself to sleep in difficult situations, quickly and without ceremony, prioritizing recovery over comfort, waking when the vehicle stopped with her body already running before her conscious mind had caught up. She woke to Do Hyun saying her name, and the van stopped outside a building in Mapogu that turned out to be a secondary syndicate property, a nondescript commercial building with an upper floor that had been set up as temporary accommodation. There were clean clothes, there was food. She ate standing up and changed out of the catering jacket for the first time in 20 hours, and threw it in a bin and did not feel sentimental about it. Saren was in a separate room with Sam outside the door. Not imprisoned, the door wasn't locked, but contained. Nia walked past and the door was slightly open, and she saw Saren sitting on the edge of a cot with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the floor. And the image stayed with her in the way certain images stayed. Not dramatic, exactly, but true. A woman at the bottom of a decision she had made fully and was now living the weight of. Nia did not go in. At 10:30 in the evening, Taejun called everyone into the main room. He was in a different suit, dark, clean, well-fitted. Someone on Do Hyun's staff had managed it. He sat at the table and laid out what was going to happen with the same flat precision he brought to everything, and the men in the room listened with the focused attention of people who understood that the margin for error in the next 90 minutes was not a margin you measured in degrees. Shin Jae-ho will have the building, he said. Whatever he has in there, it will be substantial. He is not a man who meets on uncontrolled ground. The perimeter team Do Hyun has positioned outside cannot enter without triggering a response, so they stay outside. They wait. Their function is to seal the exit routes, not to come in unless signaled. Signal, Cheon said. If the situation inside becomes unrecoverable, Do Hyun signals from inside. The perimeter team's job at that point is not rescue. It's to ensure nothing leaves the building that shouldn't. He looked around the table. We go in through the main entrance. 4 of us, myself, Do Hyun, Cheon, and Nia. The rest of you hold the outside positions. Beck said, 4 is light. 4 is what doesn't look like an army walking into a negotiation, Taejun said. We're not going in to fight. We're going in to finish it differently. He didn't elaborate on what differently meant. Nia noticed that. She also noticed that Do Hyun did not ask, which meant Do Hyun already knew or trusted the answer enough not to require it stated. Questions, Taejun said. No questions. Then let's go. Dad. Hanul Palace at midnight was a different building from the Hanul Palace of the morning before. The wedding wreckage had been partially cleared. The flowers, the shattered glass, the overturned furniture of the ballroom, but partially was not fully, and what remained was the skeleton of something that had been intended to project power and had been interrupted. The marble columns stood. The Han River still ran silver beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The chandeliers above the main ballroom had been relit, which felt deliberate. Someone had decided this room should be visible. They came in through the main entrance because that was what had been agreed, and because arriving any other way would signal a posture that was not the posture Taejun had chosen. The ballroom was not empty. At the far end near the altar position where 48 hours ago a ceremony had been seconds from beginning, Shin Jae-ho stood. He was 63 years old, compact and still, dressed in a dark suit that had the specific quality of clothing worn by people who had never needed to perform wealth, because wealth had always simply been present. His face was the face of someone who had waited 20 years for a specific conversation and had remained patient because patience had always been his most reliable weapon. Beside him, Min Seok. Taejun's cousin looked smaller than his photographs. That was the first thing Nia noticed. Not physically smaller, but dimensionally reduced. The way people looked when the architecture they had been using to appear significant had been removed. He was standing slightly behind Shin Jae-ho's shoulder in the unconscious posture of someone who has been useful and is now aware that his utility is contingent. Around the room's perimeter, Nia counted quickly, keeping her eyes moving without appearing to count. 12 men. Positioned at the columns near the entrances in the elevated gallery above. Professionals, still. Do-hyun counted them too. She could tell because his breathing changed by a fraction. They crossed the ballroom floor, the four of them, and the sound of the wheelchair on the marble was the loudest thing in the room. They stopped 20 feet from Shin Jae-ho. The two men looked at each other. "You came," Shin Jae-ho said. His voice was measured and unhurried and had a quality of genuine interest in it, as though Tae-jun's arrival confirmed something he had believed but not been certain of. "I wasn't sure you would." "You were sure," Tae-jun said. A brief pause, almost a smile. "Yes, I was sure." He looked at Tae-jun with the look of someone examining something they have thought about for a long time at close range. "You look like your father, I've been told. Not as a compliment." "I know." Shin Jae-ho looked at the others. Do-hyun, Cheon, Nia. He stopped on Nia for a moment, with the expression of someone encountering a variable they had not modeled. Then he looked back at Tae-jun. "The buyout," he said. "Your father paid my father $11 million for a stake that was worth $60. The valuation was manipulated through an accounting firm your father owned through 2 intermediaries. My father signed the settlement because he didn't know, and by the time he found out, the legal window was gone." He paused. "My father died believing he had been robbed. He was correct." "Yes," Tae-jun said. Shin Jae-ho blinked. Whatever he had expected, it was not that. "You know," he said, "I found the accounting records when I was 31, during a review of the organization's historical financial structure." Tae-jun's voice was even and clear. "The manipulation was not subtle once you knew what to look for. My father was skilled at many things. Covering his tracks was not among them." The ballroom was so quiet that the river outside was audible. "You knew," Shin Jae-ho said, "for 7 years, and you said nothing. There was no one to say it to. Your father was dead. You had disappeared from any visible position in the industry. The settlement was legally complete." He paused. "I made arrangements to have the difference calculated. 60 million minus 11, plus compound interest for 30 years. I had it prepared as a corrective transfer. I didn't know how to reach you without admitting your father's crime," Shin Jae-ho said. "Yes." The words sat there. Nia watched Shin Jae-ho's face. It was doing something complicated. The face of a man who has organized 20 years of patient destruction around a single story and has just been handed a detail that doesn't fit the story. Not enough to collapse it, but enough to create a fissure. "A corrective transfer," he said. "While your organization was using the capital that should have been my father's to build what you currently have." "Yes." "And the bombing was not corrected by a transfer," Tae-jun said. "No, 3 of my men died. I lost the use of my legs. And the 7 years of infiltration that preceded it." He stopped. Something moved in his jaw, the only visible sign. "Those things are not settled by money. I know that." "Then why are you here?" Shin Jae-ho said. "If you know they're not settled." "Because continuing is worse than stopping," Tae-jun said. "Not because I forgive it, because the alternative to stopping is a war between our organizations that neither of us can win cleanly, that will cost both of us more than the original debt was worth, and that will end with someone else, someone who had nothing to do with what my father did 30 years ago, holding both territories while we're both diminished." He looked at Shin Jae-ho steadily. "I came because I think you're intelligent enough to have already run that calculation, and I think the answer you got was the same answer I got." The silence stretched out across the marble floor and the damaged altar and the relit chandeliers of a room that had been built for a ceremony that never happened. Min-seok, from behind Shin Jae-ho's shoulder, said, "He's stalling." Nobody looked at him. "He's stalling for a reason," Min-seok said. His voice had the high, tight quality of a man who can feel the situation moving away from him and is trying to interrupt its momentum by speaking. "He has people outside. Do-hyun's network. He's running a containment, but Min-seok," Tae-jun said. He did not raise his voice. "Sit down." "You don't get to—" I said sit down. The authority in the words was not volume. It was something else, something that came from 15 years of being the person in the room whose voice ended conversations rather than starting them. Min-seok stopped talking. He did not sit down, but he stopped talking, which was the substantive thing. Shin Jae-ho had not taken his eyes off Tae-jun. "The corrective transfer," he said. "You said you had it prepared." "I did." "How much?" "Compound interest over 30 years on 49 million. The figure is approximately 230 million. The number landed. Shin Jae-ho looked at the floor for a moment. Not submission, the look of a man doing arithmetic with things that were not numbers. 20 years. His father's face, the particular texture of an inherited wound. "And the frozen capital," he said. "My architect's routing remains frozen," Tae-jun said. "The processor flag holds for another 68 hours. What happens to it depends on this conversation." "You'd release it." "I'd release the recovery of it, yes, to an account of your specification, in lieu of the corrective transfer." He paused. "The amounts are approximately equivalent." Shin Jae-ho looked at him for a long time. In the gallery above, Nia was aware of the perimeter men, their stillness, their attention, the invisible wire of tension that ran through the room and connected everyone in it to this specific exchange. One wrong word, one wrong movement. The wire was there, and everyone felt it. Then Shin Jae-ho looked at Min Seok. Min Seok understood what the look meant before anyone explained it. "Wait," Min Seok said. "Wait. We had an agreement." "We had an arrangement," Shin Jae-ho said. "It's concluded." "You can't—" "I delivered everything you needed. The access, the accounts, the timing. You delivered a failed assassination and a frozen asset," Shin Jae-ho said. His voice had not changed temperature. It was the voice of a man closing a ledger. "The arrangement is concluded." Min Seok looked at Tae-jun. His face had gone through several things in rapid sequence. Calculation, desperation, a brief consideration of the men around the room and the odds they represented, and had arrived at something that looked almost like the face of a person seeing themselves clearly for the first time in a long time. It was not a comfortable view. "Tae-jun," he said. Tae-jun looked at him. "I grew up in your shadow," Min Seok said. It came out raw, not polished, the words of someone who had rehearsed a different version and had abandoned it mid-delivery. "Every room I walked into, every conversation I had inside the organization, everything I ever built inside that structure, it was always, you were always—" He stopped. He started again. "I deserved more than what I was given." "Maybe," Tae-jun said. The word stopped Min Seok completely. "Maybe you did," Tae-jun said. "That's a real possibility. The way the organization was structured around me, the way my father designed it, and the way I maintained it, left very little room for anyone beside me. That may have been a genuine injustice to you." He looked at his cousin. His face was not soft, but it was not without recognition. "It also doesn't justify what you did. Both of those things are true simultaneously." Min Seok's jaw worked. His eyes were bright in a way that was not composed. "What happens now?" he said. "You surrender," Tae-jun said, "to Do-hyun, tonight. Everything you have access to, communications, accounts, contacts, all of it, and then you stop." "And if I don't?" "Then Shin Jae-ho's arrangement is concluded and you have no allies in this room. And the 12 men on the perimeter are employed by an organization that is currently deciding whether your value as a continuing problem outweighs the cost of resolving it." He looked at his cousin steadily. "I'm offering you the option where you walk away. Take it." The room held the decision. Min Seok looked at Shin Jae-ho. Shin Jae-ho looked at the floor, which was the most complete answer available. Min Seok's shoulders dropped. Not dramatically, just the architecture of a man who has been holding a posture for a very long time, releasing the effort it required. He looked suddenly very tired, and very young, and very much like someone whose cousin he actually was. "Do-hyun," Tae-jun said. Do-hyun moved to Min Seok's side. And then everything happened at once. The shot came from the gallery. Not at Tae-jun, not at Shin Jae-ho. At Do-hyun. It caught him in the left shoulder and the impact turned him sideways, and he hit the marble floor, and Nia was moving before the sound of it had finished echoing. Moving toward the chair, getting behind it, driving it hard to the left toward the column cover, because standing still was death, and the shot had come from above, which meant the angle was downward, which meant the column was the correct geometry. She hit the column with the chair's footrest and stopped hard. Do-hyun, Tae-jun said. Down, Do-hyun said from the floor. His voice was tight and functional, not panicked. I'm down, shoulder. I'm functional. He had his weapon up already, left hand on the floor for stability, right hand elevated, scanning the gallery. Cheon had his weapon out and was behind the adjacent column shouting something in Korean that Nia didn't catch. Shin Jae-ho was on his feet with his hands visible, which was either an instinct toward visible non-aggression or an instruction to his men, and she couldn't tell which. That wasn't me, Shin Jae-ho said loudly, clearly, toward the gallery. Stand down. Nothing stood down. A second shot hit the marble 2 feet from Tae-jun's chair. Stone fragments. Nia felt one catch her forearm above the wrist, a bright line of pain, not deep, but immediate and undeniable, and she pressed harder into the column and kept the chair behind it. Whose men? Tae-jun said. He was speaking to Shin Jae-ho, across the 8 feet of open floor between the column and Shin Jae-ho's position, and his voice was still absolutely level. Not mine, Shin Jae-ho said. He looked genuinely uncertain, which was the most unsettling expression she had seen on him. Min Seok, Do-hyun said from the floor. He was pointing. Min Seok was gone. In the 12 seconds between the first shot and now, while the room reorganized around the violence, Tae-jun's cousin had simply walked into the commotion and disappeared toward the east entrance of the ballroom. Tae-jun looked at the space where Min Seok had been. From the gallery, a voice, not Ryu Song-jin, a different voice, younger, speaking in Korean that Nia caught the edges of. Do-hyun translated from the floor in a rapid undertone. Third party. Someone Min Seok brought independently. Not Shin Jae-ho's men. Min Seok had his own insurance. How many? Tae-jun said. Gallery, Do-hyun said. Minimum 2, possibly 4. Shin Jae-ho from his position. I can pull my men from the perimeter. Your men on the perimeter are already engaged, Cheon said, phone to his ear, relaying from the outside team. Our people have the exits. Min Seok is inside the building, Tae-jun said. He didn't leave. He went to the east corridor. He looked at Nia. She was the one who knew the building. He was looking at her because she knew the building. She thought fast. East corridor from the ballroom. Service access on the right. Loading dock at the end. Freight elevator on the left. The freight elevator opened onto 3 floors. Event prep level, executive suites, rooftop mechanical level. Rooftop, she said. The mechanical level. If he has people up there, the sight lines cover the whole ballroom from above. She looked at the ceiling, at the glass panels, at the chandeliers relit by someone who had wanted this room visible. He lit the chandeliers, she said. Min Seok did, before we arrived. He wanted us lit from below. The gallery shot was the signal. Tae-jun looked up at the chandelier, the ceiling, then at her. The mechanical level access, he said. Service staircase in the east corridor, steel door, push bar. It bypasses the elevator. She paused. It's 12 flights. I know, he said. There's no lift access to the mechanical level. It's service only. She held his gaze. I have to go. A beat. Cheon goes with you, he said. Cheon needs to hold this room. Then, I know the layout, she said. I'm fast. I can get to the staircase before whoever's up there adjusts their position. She looked at him. I need 2 minutes. His jaw set, his hands on the armrests pressed down. 2 minutes, he said. If you're not back at this column in 2 minutes with that staircase secured, Cheon comes after you. 2 minutes, she said. She moved. The east corridor was 40 feet from the column, 40 feet of open floor with a downward angle from the gallery. She stayed low, using the overturned ceremony furniture as a regular cover, moving in the broken pattern her brother Marcus had explained to her once as making yourself a bad target, which meant never traveling in a straight line and never pausing in the same place twice. A shot hit the floor 6 inches behind her right foot, and she felt the impact through her shoe and kept moving and did not look back. The corridor door. She hit the push bar with her forearm. The cut above her wrist screamed briefly, and went through and let it close behind her. The corridor was dark. Emergency lighting at the floor, the same orange glow as the Yongdo basement. She found the steel door to the service staircase by feel and pushed it open and started climbing. 12 flights. Her legs found a rhythm. 2 steps at a time, hand on the rail, only for balance, breathing through her nose and out through her mouth, the way Tae-jun had told her to on the corridor floor of Hanul Palace, what felt like 100 years ago. The staircase was concrete and narrow, and the sound of her own footsteps was loud in ways she couldn't control and didn't try to. 8 flights. 9. She could hear movement above her, at least 2 sets of feet on the metal walkway of the mechanical level. Moving, adjusting, 10 flights. She slowed, controlled her breathing down by force of will until it was quieter than it wanted to be. The cut on her forearm was warm and wet, and she registered it the way you register things that need attention later, filing it under after and moving on. 11 flights. The door at the top of the staircase had a small wire-reinforced window. She looked through it. The mechanical level was a vast, low-ceiling space filled with HVAC units, cable runs, ventilation stacks, a world of industrial infrastructure above the palace's decorated face. The glass panels of the ballroom roof were immediately below, the chandeliers visible through them from above like inverse constellations. And there, positioned between 2 HVAC units with clear sightlines down through the glass panels to the ballroom floor, 2 men, rifles, watching the room below, watching Tae-jun. Nia looked at the door handle, looked at the 2 men, looked at the layout between the door and the nearest HVAC unit, 15 feet of open walkway. She had no weapon. She had a cut forearm, and 2 minutes on a clock she couldn't see, and the layout of this building in her head, and the knowledge that the men below were being watched through glass by people waiting for. The door opened inward. That was the thing she had noticed on the way up. The handle orientation, the hinge placement on the left side, the way the door would swing into the mechanical level rather than toward her. It meant she could not use it as cover. It meant the moment she pushed through, she was in the open, 15 feet of walkway between her and the nearest HVAC unit, and the 2 men with rifles would have a clean angle for approximately 3 seconds before she cleared the unit's edge. 3 seconds was too long. She stood on the other side of the door with her hand on the handle and her forearm bleeding quietly into her sleeve, and thought about Marcus, who had told her once that in any situation where the options were bad, and worse, the correct move was to change the structure of the situation before you committed to either option. Don't choose between the doors someone else built, he'd said. Find the wall. She looked at the mechanical level through the wire-reinforced window. The 2 men. The HVAC units. The cable runs overhead. Thick conduit bundles running along the ceiling infrastructure, crossing the space above the walkway. And directly above the door, a junction box. The kind used in industrial electrical distribution, mounted to the ceiling with 2 accessible breaker handles visible through the mesh. The emergency lighting in the corridor ran from a separate circuit. The mechanical level lighting ran from the main building system. She looked at the junction box. She looked at the door. She pushed through the door, grabbed the frame with her right hand, swung her body upward rather than forward. Her left foot found the door handle, her right found the frame edge, and she was climbing the door rather than walking through it, the cut on her forearm pulling open further with the effort, and she registered it as information rather than pain. 2 seconds. She reached the junction box. The breaker handles were stiff, but they moved, and she pulled both simultaneously, and the mechanical level went dark. She dropped back to the walkway and moved. In the dark, with the ventilation noise of the HVAC units covering everything, she covered the 15 feet to the nearest unit in 4 steps and pressed her back against the metal housing and stopped. She could hear them. 2 men recalibrating in darkness. The sounds of bodies shifting, equipment moving, a short exchange of words she caught fragments of. They had lost their sightline through the glass panels. The chandeliers below were still lit. The ballroom circuit was separate. But without the mechanical level lights, the glass panels threw reflection rather than transparency, and from above the 2 men were now looking at mirror images of the chandelier light rather than the ballroom floor. She moved along the HVAC unit's edge toward the sound of the nearer man. She was not going to fight him. She was 32 years old, 5'6", with a cut on her forearm, and no weapon and no training beyond the specific education of having grown up in a neighborhood where the cost of miscalculation was immediate and personal. She was not going to fight him. She was going to use the structure of the situation. The nearer man was approximately 8 feet beyond the HVAC unit, between two ventilation stacks, still trying to reestablish his sightline through the glass below. She found the cable run that crossed above his position. She had seen it through the window, had mapped it, knew it was there, and she found the anchor point where the conduit bundle was secured to the ceiling infrastructure with a large industrial clamp. The clamp was old. The facility was old. The bolt holding the clamp had 30 years of harbor salt air in it. She pulled. The bolt resisted. She put her full weight on it, both hands, the cut forearm screaming, and pulled. The clamp released. The conduit bundle dropped. Not on the man, not directly, but the weight of 30 feet of industrial cable hitting the walkway 2 feet from his position in complete darkness produced the specific combination of sound and shock that caused him to step back sharply, and the walkway's edge was behind him. And there was a rail, but he hit it wrong and went down hard on his back, with the rail catching his ribs and his rifle sliding across the walkway floor with the particular metallic sound of something expensive and dangerous traveling somewhere uncontrolled. The second man reacted. She could hear him moving toward his partner's position, and she picked up the rifle by feel and put as much walkway between herself and both of them as the space allowed, and found the door to the staircase by memory and went through it. She went down 12 flights faster than she'd come up. The corridor door, the ballroom. She went through and back into the light and the specific, held breath quality of a room where everyone was waiting. Do-hyun was still on the floor, conscious, his hand pressed to his shoulder. Cheon had his weapon pointed at the gallery. Shin Jae-ho had not moved. Ryu Seong-jin had appeared from somewhere and was standing near Shin Jae-ho with his hands visible and an expression that was difficult to read in any language. Tae-jun was behind the column exactly where she had left him. He looked at her, at the rifle, at her forearm. She crossed to the column and put her back against it. "Gallery is compromised," she said. She was breathing hard and trying not to show it, and showing it anyway. "2 men. One is down. The other lost his rifle." She held up the one she was carrying. "This one." "Min Seok's people," Do-hyun said from the floor. "They don't have a sightline anymore," she said. "I killed the mechanical level lights." Tae-jun looked at her for a moment in a way that she could not fully name. Something between recognition and something older and less organized than recognition. "Min Seok," he said. "East corridor." "He didn't make it to the roof," Cheon said. He had his phone to his ear. "Outside team has the loading dock. He's somewhere in the building." "He's in the building without his insurance," Tae-jun said. He looked at Shin Jae-ho across the open floor. "Your men on the perimeter. Call them in." Shin Jae-ho looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded at Ryu Seong-jin. Ryu made a call. 3 words. The perimeter men came in through the east and west entrances simultaneously, 8 of them, moving with the professional efficiency of people who had been waiting for exactly this instruction. They fanned through the building in pairs. They found Min Seok 11 minutes later in the executive suite corridor on the 3rd floor. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his phone in his hand, trying to reach someone who was not answering. When Cheon and 2 of Shin Jae-ho's men came around the corner, he looked up at them with the face of a man who has run out of moves and is sitting in the specific silence that follows the last one. He did not run. He did not fight. He put the phone down on the floor beside him. "Okay," he said. Just that. The ballroom clearing took another hour. Do-hyun was moved to a sitting position against a column and a medic from the outside team. Do-hyun had thought to bring a medic, because Do-hyun thought to bring everything. Examined the shoulder and said the word through and through with the particular satisfaction of a medical professional delivering good news in bad circumstances. The bullet had not struck bone. There would be surgery, rehabilitation, a period of limited function. Do-hyun received this information and said, "When can I work?" And the medic said 2 weeks, desk functions, and Do-hyun said 1, and the medic said nothing because the answer was already implied. Nia's forearm was cleaned and bandaged at the same time. The cut was not deep, stone fragment, not blade, but it ran 4 inches along the outer forearm, and the cleaning required the kind of determined indifference to discomfort that she had by now in reasonable supply. She sat on the ballroom floor near Do-hyun with her arm extended and let the medic work and watch the room. Shin Jae-ho and Tae-jun were speaking near the altar, not with raised voices, not with the particular performance of 2 powerful men demonstrating power. They were speaking the way people spoke when the fighting was done, and what remained was the actual work. Quiet, specific, the language of terms and conditions, and the precise structure of what came next. She couldn't hear it. She didn't try to. She watched Taejun's face from across the room and thought about what it had cost him to come here and say what he'd said. To name his father's crime out loud in front of the man who had organized 7 years of destruction around it. To say maybe you deserved more. To offer a corrective transfer for a debt that was not legally his to pay, and that no amount of money actually resolved. She thought about what it had cost, and she thought it was probably more than anyone in this room understood, and that Taejun was going to carry the weight of the pain for longer than any of this would last. The medic finished. She flexed her fingers. Everything worked. Min Seok was brought into the ballroom by Cheon. He walked under his own power, which was something. He looked at Taejun, who had finished the conversation with Shin Jae-ho and was now positioned in the center of the ballroom floor, the chandeliers above him making the room look almost as it had been designed to look, which was a strange kind of irony that nobody commented on. "Sit down," Taejun said. Min Seok sat in one of the ceremony chairs that had been righted during the clearing. He sat the way he had stood in the corridor, without the performance of dignity, just the fact of being upright in a seat. His hands were in his lap. "I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself," Taejun said. "I heard the explanation." "Then what?" Min Seok said. "Then you surrender everything you accessed. Every account, every contact, every communication in the last 14 months that touched syndicate infrastructure. Do Hyun's team processes it with you. Takes as long as it takes." And after, Taejun looked at his cousin. The look contained things that a conversation could not hold. 15 years of a specific proximity, a shared childhood in the same compound in Seongbuk-dong, the memory of who Min Seok had been before resentment had become his organizing principle. "After you're done," Taejun said. "Not removed, not punished beyond what you've already lost. Done. You leave the organization, you take what's left of your personal accounts, and you go somewhere and you build something that's yours. Not mine, not the family name. Yours." He paused. "That's the offer." Min Seok looked at him. For the first time since the corridor, his face was doing something unmanaged. "Why?" he said. "Because you're my cousin," Taejun said. "That didn't stop you from doing what you did. It doesn't stop me from giving you a way out." He held Min Seok's gaze. "Take it or don't." Min Seok looked down at his hands. He sat with whatever was happening inside him without showing it cleanly, which was, she thought, possibly the most honest thing about him, that he was a man who contained things incompletely and had never found a way to put them down. "Okay," he said, for the second time that night, just that word. Seirin was brought from the Mapo property at 4 in the morning. Taejun had made the call himself from the ballroom, while the room was still being organized around the aftermath of everything. He had spoken briefly and given an address and ended the call and not explained it to anyone, which meant everyone in the room understood it without explanation. She arrived with Sam and stood in the doorway of the ballroom and looked at the space, the altar, the columns, the chandeliers, with the expression of someone returning to the site of a decision they have had several hours to examine from every angle. Taejun was near the window. The Han River was still there, still running silver, though the sky above it was beginning its gradual shift from black toward the particular dark blue that preceded actual dawn. Seirin walked across the room to him. She walked the way she had walked in the footage from the pre-wedding events, straight-backed, composed, the walk of someone who had decided long ago that her carriage was the one thing fully under her control. She stopped 4 feet from the chair. "The international fraud charges," she said. "The account access. The coordination with Min Seok." "Yes," he said. "All of it is documented." "All of it?" She nodded. She was not surprised. The composure on her face was not the composure of someone who had expected rescue. It was the composure of someone who had looked at the full shape of their situation and had decided to meet it upright. "What I did to you," she said, "at the ceremony, the humiliation of it. I'm not interested in the humiliation," he said. "I'm interested in the 3 of my men who were positioned in exposed locations based on the security briefing you helped Min Seok construct. One of them has a fractured shoulder, Another was in the ballroom when the first shot was fired. She absorbed that. Something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt, exactly, but the particular expression of someone who had allowed themselves to think of a plan in terms of its moving parts, and was now confronting the parts that had been moving people. "I didn't know there would be a shooter," she said. "No," he said. "You knew there would be a robbery and a humiliation and an escape plan. The shooter was Min Seok's arrangement with Shin Jae-ho, not yours." He looked at her steadily. "That's a distinction that matters legally. Whether it matters to you in some other way is not something I can answer for you." She looked out the window at the river. "What happens?" she said. "International financial crime charges are already in process. You'll be contacted by an investigator within 48 hours. I won't interfere with that process." He paused. "I also won't add to it. What's documented is what's documented." "That's—" She stopped. "It's what I can do," he said. "Not for what you did. Because using the legal system as a personal instrument is something I've avoided for 15 years, and I'm not changing that now." He looked at her profile in the window light. "What you do with the 48 hours before the investigator contacts you is your own decision." She turned and looked at him. "You're not what I expected," she said. "When they told me about you, before the arrangement, they described a man who—" She stopped again. "They made you sound like only one thing." "People often do that," he said. "It's easier." "Yes," she said. "It is." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned and walked back across the ballroom, and her footsteps on the marble had the deliberate quality of someone leaving on their own terms. And the door closed behind her, and she was gone. The dawn came slowly. By the time the sky outside the Han River windows had moved from dark blue to the specific gray gold of early morning, the ballroom had been cleared of everyone except Tae-jun and Nia and Do-hyun, who had refused to be moved to a hospital and was sitting against the column with his medically bandaged shoulder and his operational phone and the expression of a man who considered rest a negotiating position rather than a condition. The agreement with Shin Jae-ho had held through the night. The financial architect would face prosecution through legitimate channels. Shin Jae-ho had offered the cooperation, which was the most expensive gesture available to him and which Tae-jun had accepted without comment. The frozen capital would be released through a legal corrective transfer process that Do-hyun estimated would take 4 to 6 months to complete. The syndicate's allied organizations had been contacted before dawn. The declarations they received confirmed what the night had decided. Kang Tae-jun remained the leader of the Black Phoenix Syndicate. Min Seok's claim was formally withdrawn. The processor flag on the routing chain had been confirmed still active. The capital was intact. Do-hyun would need surgery. Cheon had a broken finger from the corridor altercation, which he had wrapped himself with tape from the medic kit without being asked. Nia had 4 inches of bandaged forearm and the specific kind of bone-deep exhaustion that arrives after adrenaline has been running for 30 consecutive hours and has finally stopped. She was sitting on the altar step, the same step where a ceremony had been about to begin 48 hours ago, with her arms on her knees and her head down, not sleeping, just existing in the particular flatness that follows events that have required everything you have. She heard the wheelchair on the marble. Tae-jun stopped beside her. He did not speak immediately. He looked out the window at the river and the beginning of the city's morning, the first delivery trucks, the lights of early commuters on the bridge, the water catching the dawn color the way water always caught available light, indifferent and beautiful. "The catering company," he said finally. "Your employer." "I've already lost the contract," she said. "After yesterday, the palace event." "I know. I've spoken with them." He looked at her. "They've been compensated for any loss. Your employment record has been cleared of any connection to the incident." She looked up at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I did, actually," he said. "You lost your job because of something I put you in the middle of." "I walked into the middle of it." "You walked into a preparation room to deliver water glasses." He held her gaze. "The rest was my situation, not yours. I owe you a complete accounting for what you've lost because of it." She thought about that. She thought about the catering jacket in the bin in the Mapo property, and the apartment she hadn't been home to in 2 days, and her mother who was going to call on Sunday, and the city that had been her home for 2 years, and that she was now looking at from inside a ballroom in a palace on the Han River at 5 in the morning, after something that she did not yet have adequate language for. "My forearm," she said. "Yes. I broke 2 electrical circuits and dropped a cable conduit on a professional gunman," she said. "Without a weapon. In the dark. Yes. I just want to note," she said, that is not in the job description for hospitality catering staff." Something happened to his face. Not quite a smile. His face did not arrive at smiles easily. She had learned that much. But something adjacent to it. Something that involved the muscles around his eyes in a way that was brief and genuine and not performed. "No," he said, "it isn't." She looked at the river. A cargo ship was moving slowly down the channel, its running lights still on in the early light, its bulk enormous and unhurried. She watched it for a while. "What happens to the organization now?" she said. "Reconstruction," he said. Ji-Won's access is being audited retroactively. 7 years of potential exposure. Choi is in custody and cooperating. The account monitoring system is being rebuilt from the ground structure. The allied organizations will need managing. There will be those who interpret last night as weakness rather than resolution, and that interpretation will need correcting. He paused. "It is in the most direct sense a large amount of work. You sound like you're looking forward to it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I sound like someone who understands the difference between a situation with a path forward and a situation without one," he said. "This is the first kind. For the first time in 8 months, this is the first kind." She understood what he meant. 8 months since the bombing. 8 months of recovering physical function while managing an organization being slowly undermined from within by a man he had chosen himself. 8 months of operating from inside a compromised structure without knowing it was compromised. "You didn't know about Ji-Won," she said. 7 years. You couldn't have known." "I should have. People say that," she said, "about the things they didn't see coming. I should have known. But the nature of something being hidden is that it's hidden. You're not failing to see something that's visible. You're failing to see something that someone has worked very hard to make invisible. That's different." She looked at him. "You know the difference. You're just not giving yourself the benefit of it." He looked at her with the look she had come to understand as the look he gave information he was filing into a structure rather than dismissing. "You do that," he said. "What?" "Find the distinction that changes the weight of something, and say it plainly." "I grew up around people who carried things they shouldn't have been carrying," she said. "You learn to recognize it." He was quiet for a while. Outside, the cargo ship had cleared the frame of the window and the river was open again, just water and light, and the city waking up on both banks. "Your plans," he said. "After this, the apartment, the work situation." "I'll figure it out," she said. "I always do." "There is a position," he said, "within the organization's operational structure. Intelligence and threat assessment. The role has been—" He stopped, considered the word. "The role has been filled inadequately for some time. The qualities it requires are specific." He looked at her. "I'm not offering it because you're owed it. I'm offering it because you're suited to it. Those are different reasons, and I want to be clear about which one this is." She looked at him. "You want to hire the maid?" she said. "I want to hire the person who noticed battery acid at 9 in the morning, identified a target's positioning by behavioral pattern, repaired a mobility device from institutional memory, read a financial routing chain with no prior training, navigated a building she had visited once to neutralize 2 armed professionals in the dark, and did all of it without ever—" He stopped. "Without ever once acting like the situation was larger than her capacity to meet it." He held her gaze. "That person. Yes." Nia looked at the altar step, at her bandaged forearm, at the window and the river and the beginning of a soul mourning that had arrived despite everything that had tried to prevent it. She thought about Englewood and the wrong street home and her brother Marcus, who was still alive because he'd learned to read the room. She thought about 2 years in Seoul building a life that was functional and safe and somewhat smaller than the version of herself she had brought to it. She thought about the moment in the preparation suite when she had looked at a man in a locked wheelchair and had made a decision that had nothing to do with safety. She thought about what it felt like to be in a room where the thing you were good at was the thing the room needed. "What does it pay?" she said. And this time it was a smile. Brief, real, arriving on his face like something that had been planning to happen for a while and had finally found the right moment. "More than water glasses," he said. She laughed. It came out rough and tired and genuine, the laugh of someone who had been running on reserve power for 30 hours and found, at the end of it, something that still worked. She pressed her hand over her mouth to contain it, and it came through anyway, and she didn't fight it because there was no corridor to escape through and no shooter to avoid, and no more situations that required her to be smaller than she was. Taejun watched her. His expression had the quality of something that had not been in the building 48 hours ago. Not warmth, exactly. Or not only warmth. Something that had been cleared of other things. Of the debris and obstruction of a situation that had been pressing against him from every direction. And what was left underneath was a person who had not become what the last 8 months had tried to make him. Who had arrived here, at this altar, at this dawn, still intact. "I'll need time to think about it," she said, when the laugh had settled. "Of course," he said. "A few days." "Take them." She nodded. They sat with that for a moment. The offer and the space around it. The particular quality of a door that was open and not being pushed. Outside, the sun had crossed the horizon. The Han River went from gray gold to something warmer, the water catching full morning light and holding it across its surface all the way to the bridge, where the first proper traffic of the day was beginning to build. Seoul going about its morning, the city indifferent and continuous and genuinely beautiful in the specific way of places that have survived difficult things and have not made that survival the only thing about them. Do Hyun from his column. The hospital is going to become non-negotiable in approximately 40 minutes. "I know," Taejun said. "I'm noting it now so that when it becomes non-negotiable in 40 minutes, I can say I noted it." "Your noting is noted." Nia stood up from the altar step. Her legs registered the protest of a body that had been asked for too much and was presenting its invoice. She worked through it and straightened and looked at the room. The ballroom of the Hanul Palace, which had been designed for the kind of power that announced itself in marble and chandeliers and imported cherry blossoms, and which had been the site of a wedding that never happened and a war that had just, quietly, ended. She thought, I was supposed to be delivering water glasses. She thought, look where paying attention gets you. She extended her hand to Taejun, the same hand she had extended in the preparation suite, the gesture she had used when she took the handles of his chair for the first time, when she had crossed the ballroom floor under fire, when she had made a series of decisions that she could not have fully explained in the moment, but that had, collectively, been the right ones. He looked at her hand, then at her face. He took her hand, not as the gesture of a man accepting assistance, as the gesture of a person meeting another person at the point where the distance between them had become something neither of them needed to maintain. His grip was firm and present and without performance. "Nia Brooks," he said. Her full name. The way he said it had weight. The weight of a name being placed somewhere it would stay. "Kang Taejun," she said. They held the handshake for a moment. Outside the window, the river moved. The city moved. The morning moved over everything the way mornings did, without particular concern for what had happened the night before, without ceremony, without asking whether anyone was ready. Just the next hour arriving after the last one, the way it always had, the way it always would. She let go first. He let her. She turned and walked toward the ballroom exit, not running, not rushing, walking at the pace of someone who had somewhere to be and was choosing her own speed in getting there. Her forearm ached with a specific and honest pain. Her legs were tired. Her mind had the particular clarity of exhaustion past its own peak, which was not unlike the clarity of the other side of something very difficult, clean, stripped, seeing only what was actually there. At the ballroom door, she paused and looked back. Taejun was at the window. The morning light came through the floor-to-ceiling glass and fell across him and across the chair and across the altar behind him, and the river was visible over his shoulder, broad and silver and continuous. He was looking out, not at her, already forward, already in the next thing, the way a person moved when they had decided the only direction available was ahead. She understood that. She had been moving in that direction her entire life. She went through the door. The corridor beyond was clean and quiet and lit by the ordinary light of a building returning to its normal functions, maintenance staff beginning their work, the sound of an elevator somewhere, the distant baseline hum of a city that did not stop for anyone's crisis or anyone's ending. She walked through it, and the bandage on her forearm was white against her skin, and her catering jacket was in a bin in Mapogu, and somewhere in her apartment her phone was waiting with calls she needed to make and a life she needed to return to and reorganize around what it had become. She walked out of the Haniul Palace into the Seoul morning. The cherry blossom trees stood in their imported rows, their petals reduced by 2 days of weather to a thin scatter on the circular driveway. They were still there, still standing, still doing what they had been brought here to do, which was simply to be present and to be what they were, regardless of what had happened around them. She stood among them for a moment. The Han River was not visible from here, but she could feel the direction of it, the particular quality of air near moving water, cooler and more alive than the air away from it. She turned her face toward it. Then she walked to the road, and the morning traffic was moving, and Seoul was fully awake now and entirely indifferent to her and to everything that had happened in the building behind her, and that indifference was, she found, exactly right. The city owed her nothing. She had done what she came here to do. Not what she was sent to do, which was water glasses and event setup, but what she had decided to do in a preparation suite at 7 in the morning when a man in a locked wheelchair looked at her, and she had recognized something in the quality of his stillness, and had chosen, for reasons she could not fully articulate then and could not fully articulate now, to stay. She had stayed. She had stayed, and it had cost her things and returned other things and changed the shape of what she was moving toward. That was how it worked, she thought. That was how it had always worked. You paid attention. You noticed the thing. You made the move that nobody was watching for. And then you found out what you were made of by what the situation asked for. She knew what she was made of. A taxi came down the road and she raised her hand and it stopped, and she got in and told the driver her street in Mapogu, and he pulled into traffic, and Seoul opened around them, enormous and ordinary and entirely itself. The river somewhere below, and to the east, the city rising on both sides, the morning already well underway. She did not look back. She was already thinking about what came next.